Going to begin this Thursday, March 22nd CRA board meeting. And we'll begin, Roxanne, I'm assuming with public comments. Do we have any speakers?
Yes, we do. We do have public comments on agenda item 1 speaker, Ms. Rosa Morgan, who does want to speak on 2 agenda items, 501 and 502. Ms. Morgan, if you would, please come and state your name and address for the record. And for each item, I will give you 3 minutes. Thank you very much.
Good morning. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you. I want to address just very briefly the 2 agenda items that were referenced. The first has to do with the expansion of the CRA district. I was very privileged and pleased to be able to be at the Citizens Advisory Committee that discussed this issue, and I was very proud of the fact that they took a lengthy time to discuss this issue. They looked at each of those 3 areas, they debated it very much in depth, they discussed the pros and cons of it, they were thoughtful, they were insightful, and I was really pleased to see that they spent that time as citizens to put that time and effort into the improvement of the area in which they live. As you know from the agenda item, they voted unanimously to accept the recommendation of only expansion into the South City area. And I know that Commissioner Richardson has lobbied long and hard for many years for the expansion of the CRA, Greater Frenchtown Southside CRA, into the South City District. And I was fortunate to be able to be at the Affordable Housing Workshop yesterday and hear of some of the proposed changes for the Orange Avenue project, which is going to really change the dynamics and look of that whole entire area. And I see how the CRA would complement that area. So I appreciate Commissioner Richardson's continued support of expansion into that area. The other 2 areas kind of popped up off the radar screen and really have not been justified in any way as to why we are expanding in those areas. And the Citizens Advisory Committee voted not to adopt those 2 areas at this time. And I would ask this CRA board to adopt that recommendation based on their thoughtful deliberative process in recommending only one of those areas. I went back to the September minutes of the meeting where policy direction was requested from staff on the expansion of the CRA, and there was 2 issues that were put before the staff. One was to consider and to come up with the documentation that would support expansion into the South City area. That was one. The second one was to look at creating a new district and to look at any other areas that may be included in a new CRA district. Those were 2 things. And what we got was a combination of those 2 things. If we are going to add additional years to the CRA, I think there is ample time to give this a thoughtful look and decide whether or not we want to expand in an area in addition to South City, and if so, why. So I would recommend that we take the Citizens Advisory Committee recommendations to heart and move to adopt at this time only the South City expansion and not the other 2 areas based on their very thoughtful input. The other issue has to do with the agenda item related to the demolition program, where we have adopted the housing department's priorities and directions for how that program would operate, with the exception of the private property demolition. I think that this is not ready for prime time yet. I think that there needs to be some other pieces added into this demolition program. I understand the thrust of demolishing housing, but I think we need to write into that policy something that has to do with rebuilding on that land, affordable housing. Right now, housing to the north of the Griffin Heights is selling at between $125 and $145 a square foot. So as we provide vacant land, we are enabling people who want to develop on those pieces of land and develop housing that may not be affordable to the population that we are concerned in serving. In the year 2000, in the revitalization plan, one of the goals for affordable housing was that we would use the tax increment funds to rehabilitate up to 800 homes and build 300 new homes in the greater Frenchtown area. I don't think that we have accomplished that goal yet. The other piece that I would like to see added in the demolition policies was discussed yesterday at the Affordable Housing Workshop, and it has to do with land banking. I think if we demolish substandard or code violation properties, that those vacant lots should be put into a land trust, a land bank, so that we can ensure that that housing will go towards the construction of affordable housing in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Rosa.
If you would, please go ahead and state your name and address for the record. 'Cause I don't think we captured it earlier.
Rosa Morgan, 400 Capitol Circle Southeast.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker.
That's all of the speakers that we have on agenda items at this time.
Okay, great. On agenda items? Okay, are you one of them? Okay, why don't you come on up and introduce yourself, and we'll get the forms.
I'm Sarah Bardolph. I reside at 1520 Chuli Nene. I'd also like to speak on agenda item 5.01. I have more questions about this agenda item than I really do comments. I'd like to know if there's any plan for redevelopment of the area slated for demolition. I haven't seen anything like that. I don't know if it's been publicized. Like the last speaker, I'm also concerned about that land use. I agree with her that a land trust should be established and that more effort should be made to build affordable housing in the Frenchtown area. I think that the last thing that we need over there is more student housing. I don't think that we need more low-income housing projects. I think that that contributes to the problem of concentrated poverty in the area. And I'm concerned that additional block developments like we've seen with North American Properties will take place on those lands. I think that we need more incremental development. I think that we need to consult community leaders in the Frenchtown area about what needs they have and what they would like to see built over there. I'm also concerned about any patriarch oaks that might be on those lands. Just because this demolition fund is going to allow for early demolition at those sites, and we just saw at Cascades that demolition happened so quickly, and there's not even a contract in place yet for that. There's a contract, but the sale has not gone through. That's it.
Thank you very much. Next speaker.
Thank you. Next speaker, we have Barbara Doran. If you would, please state your name and address for the record, and you have 3 minutes. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Barbara Doran. I live at 1117 Azalea Drive, and I'm through the process of being concerned about those trees that aren't there anymore. I've learned a little more about CRA, and I'm interested in learning more. And looking through the agenda and hearing, I saw some information of alternative ideas about the early demolition of abandoned or troublesome properties, and I just want to say that I hope that this group is thinking about, involved in, or have as part of your mission, how do you go from whenever something is discovered or comes up as a piece of property that's a problem, like the lady was discussing last night in her neighborhood in Eastwood, and the demolition occurring, because there's lots of places here in town where it goes a long time before something's demolished, like the old Lucy Ho's place on Appalachia Parkway after it had burned. I mean, it looked like a building that was totally unsafe. But my reason for being here today is just to suggest that in that continuum, before you shorten the continuum, in the continuum, if if some organization like Habitat for Humanity or some neighborhood associations or other people or developers who like to improve things could make low-income housing, and I'm particularly interested in that, and maybe turn it from blighted and headed to demolition, it could be restored and be a home for someone because it had enough improvements. And I don't know if that's y'all's job or somebody else's job, but encouraging that kind of development and investment in our community and in our communities that have not enough low-income housing to do that. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Commissioner Richardson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, Mr. Chairman. Apparently, there's some misperceptions about what it is we're trying to accomplish through this demolition program, and I certainly appreciate all the speakers that have come this morning and given their comments and concerns about what it is. First of all, if you live in or near any of the neighborhoods that we're talking about, what you realize is that there are lots of abandoned structures in those communities where crime is occurring. That's the number one issue that we set out to address, is because there were, if you all recall, there was a rape that occurred in an abandoned house, a boarded up house in the Frenchtown community. So those issues were brought to our attention. So that was the number one objective, is to address crime in those communities. The second objective is to rid those neighborhoods of those unsightly structures that have been left abandoned and vacant for years. They're an eyesore in a lot of instances. They need to be demolished. But then also there is a process that has to be gone through, because this is private property. This is not city-owned property, and this is just for the edification of those that have come forward this morning. There is a process, and it's a lengthy process before properties can be taken or demolished. We have a code enforcement department. When complaints are made, they go out. We try to work with the property owner to bring the properties into compliance. When I used to serve as a code magistrate, I used to hear those issues all the time. When people aren't willing to bring their properties into compliance, there is a process that we go through to work with them. Liens are assessed, fines are assessed, liens are put on the property. We can't just go in and take people's personal property and private property and demolish it. So there is a lengthy process, and there are remedies in the court if someone thinks that their property has been taken. So I just want those that have come this morning to understand that we're not talking about just going in and taking people's private property and demolishing it, and it becomes under city ownership. In a lot of instances, our attorney explained to us last night, we don't want to own the property, because a lot of times there are title issues. It's heirs property, and you can't get clear title, and so we don't want the property. But certainly we've got to rid ourselves of that blight in the neighborhoods that are impacted. We have given, as a city commission, has given considerable thought, careful thought to this issue of affordable housing, low-income housing in our community. This isn't just something we started talking about yesterday. We've given considerable thought. We've made this one of our top priorities as a city because we realize that the cost of housing is going up, and one of the reasons for homelessness in our community is because individuals can't afford housing in the community. And so we're very aware of that and are determined to address that issue in partnership with the Community Redevelopment Agency. But in no way are we going through and just indiscriminately taking private property and demolishing it when there's not a clear need to do that and a willingness on the part of the property owner either to bring that property into compliance or to dispose of it one way or another. We had a lengthy affordable housing workshop here at City Hall on yesterday where we talked about what some of the alternatives for us are, the options are. One of the things we talked about is land banking, or what are we calling it, Wayne?
Trust.
The land trust, where as we acquire properties, they could be put into, or potentially put into a land trust and be developed for affordable and low-income housing. So it's not like we haven't, as representatives of this city, given considerable thought to this issue. We have. And so if there's anybody here that thinks that we haven't, we've been discussing this for a long time, and we certainly want to keep you all involved in that process. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Commissioner. Are there any additional speakers?
There is one additional speaker that I have a speaker card for on agenda items 501. Mr. Lammers, if you would, please come and state your name and address for the record, and you have 3 minutes.
Say that, guys.
Thank you. My name is Jonathan
You've got a
Lammers. I live at
microphone in front of you.
3164 Lakeshore Drive in Tallahassee. I just want to speak briefly about the Frenchtown demolitions. I'm a historian here in town, and the idea of a land trust is a very powerful one, and I'm glad that you are considering it. I think there is something else that we should look at with the land trust whenever it's possible. Historic preservation is inherently sustainable. It would be wonderful as part of this land trust program, we could think about using some sort of program involving the trades to try and rehabilitate some of these properties where possible, or if not, to do architectural salvage from these properties. Take things like wooden floors, wooden windows, other pieces that can be used to repair other properties in town. Frenchtown is a special place. It's the oldest African-American neighborhood in the state of Florida, and it is losing its character very rapidly. On my own, I've been doing some research about residents of Frenchtown in the past. I was very interested in where Ray Charles lived during World War II. He spent his summers here. Tallahassee is the first place that he ever performed professionally. Not only have we lost the clubs that he performed in, we also lost the house that he lived in on Birmingham Street. It was demolished. It's a major spot. Again, this is the first place he ever played professionally. So I'd like to think a little bit more careful consideration about these structures in Frenchtown. They're part of what give its character. And again, I understand that there are neglectful owners there, but we can do better by these buildings. The land trust is a fabulous idea. I'd just like to see it coupled with some historic preservation initiatives as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Commissioner Richardson, followed by Commissioner Ziffer.
I neglected to say that our county counterparts have been wonderful partners with us in this effort to address the affordable housing issue in our community. Thank you all so much, our county partners, our sister government.
We bombarded him.
But they have been excellent partners in this, and thank you all for bringing that to my attention. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Commissioner Ziffer.
I appreciate your comments. One of the things I know, Roxanne, I think we talked about this when we first started talking about putting the money in for demolition. The salvage is very important, because even when we have a house that is well beyond repair, there certainly are a lot of different elements that we could take out of those and use elsewhere. So I know we talked about how we were going to do that. So if maybe you could push that along a little bit, that'd be helpful.
Just to address this quickly, even though we're not on the agenda item yet, growth management, the folks that do code enforcement, we've all been talking about this. This is something that they will absolutely look at. I think everyone understands the value of being able to preserve our history, so that's definitely something that's in the
But
pipeline.
if we can't preserve the structure, there are elements in a lot of these houses
Correct.
that are salvageable.
Yeah, and there are several cities, for example, that have huge salvage programs, and I think we might be able to pull off a smaller one. It wouldn't be CRA-based, but we can talk about that at a future date.
Okay. Roxanne, do you want to introduce item 3.01? Or is that, should I?
Oh, no, I'll go
yield to
ahead and
Cherie?
introduce it. We have a presentation I think everyone will benefit from. It's from the Planning Department, and we have Cherie Bryant, here to give you a presentation on basically why urban infill is so important and how it works and what the overall impact of that is.
morning. Actually, some of the public speakers are a good lead into this. None of this is probably new to anyone, but given the talks of infill, preservation, it was that I was asked to come and just give us a little bit of a refresher course on some of the role and purpose of infill policies and planning. I know some of our speakers talked about the importance of incremental development, historic preservation. All of those play into building a healthy and vibrant community. You know, the focus on the historic homes in the neighborhood can help preserve the integrity of the neighborhood, which then allows for that incremental development. Some of the blocks you've seen in Frenchtown, much of those homes were lost in the 70s and 80s for the entire block, and so that really changed the future pathway of where they could go. So as we look at infill, it's important to take into consideration that context. So I'm just going to take a few minutes of your time this morning because I know you have a lot of, just to discuss. But going back to the 80s, and I know last night when we were speaking about the items on the trees, one person mentioned they moved here in 1980 and seen a lot of growth, and it's true. As a matter of fact, Leon County has almost doubled in population since 1980. So that it's a very different urban area than it was. And in response to that, like a lot of cities in the 80s, seeing that rampant growth and that loss in natural area, Leon County and the city of Tallahassee came together to adopt the urban service area, which is the red area that you see up there. The goal is to find a balance between accommodating that population, but also protecting the rural lands in the county. Another key thing is to grow in a financially responsible way, because we're stewards of the land. We're also stewards of as a community, of growing in a way that leaves, doesn't leave a whole, an impossible set of financial obligations for future generations. That was adopted in 1990. Since 1990, there have been almost 100,000 more people come into Leon County to call it home. So there has been a lot of land developed as a result of that. Looking forward, and that's what planning is about, is looking forward. By 2045, that's almost 25 years? And I know that always seems hard to imagine, so I like to throw it back a little bit. So go back 25 years to 1993. So it doesn't seem very far when you think about it backwards. But we're expecting another 56,000 people, projected another 56,000. And to accommodate that, that's 24,000 more homes to accommodate that population. I know that's that's hard to imagine squeezing them all in. And the important thing is we can break down and project how much of that is people moving into Tallahassee and how much of that is going to be the children and the grandchildren. And most of that's the children and the grandchildren of the people who are here now. So it's easy to say development and growth are bad things, but honestly that's just a natural process of a healthy city, is that growth. And so I think what I'm hoping to do in the coming years is to change the conversation as far as how we're growing and focus on the positive ways of accommodating the vibrancy that can come with those, with the growth that's occurring. So again, it really truly is planning for the children and grandchildren of people who are here now. Let me go though. That could be numbers like that can be kind of scary, but I want to focus on some good things before I go any further. And that this is, focusing on, it's a big green map, and that's the point. And that's the data. We're doing an analysis for the Urban Forest Master Plan, and Mindy will take a couple of minutes at the end to describe, what that's about and how people can be involved. But even with that growth, we still have in the city limits 55 to 60% of the land has tree coverage. Looking downtown. Then you see that since 1954, when we've had almost over a 500% increase in population, we still have a significant increase in tree cover in the downtown. So point is, there's certainly lots of things that we need to continue doing and try to do better, but some of the infill and replanting policies obviously are working. I wanted to touch, this is a picture, of course, of Cascades Park, obviously. I wanted to touch on that to talk about some of the logic for infill and some of the logic for doing that the places where it is going. And since we've been talking about trees a lot and impacts on infill, that's where a lot of my focus is. As we go through the comp plan land use element update, we'll talk more about some of the finances, but today I'm just going to focus on these environmental reasons. But the purpose, when you start thinking about doing infill, people, generally it's important, quality of life. Having a green space, open space is very important to a quality of life. And that's why it's important to have those built in and integrated with the higher density development. This was a drawing, actually, I don't know how many of you remember this, of Cascades Park from 10 years ago. So from the onset, Cascades Park, you can see with the amphitheater and actually where the Firestone Blossom sites now will be developed. It was the entire concept of the park from the start was to have the higher rise development, people living on the edge of the park, so that even though they have fewer, they don't have the yards that in the backyard, that space, but there's still that public space right outside the front doors. That was actually integrated from the start in this initial concept of the park before the actual engineering became a reality. And I don't want to give the impression that we expect to accommodate all of those homes, all of the 56,000 downtown, but it's a piece of the puzzle. When you have to accommodate in a sustainable way, we have to have lots of different tools in the toolbox. Suburban development still happen, but urban development's a piece of the puzzle, especially when you start looking at a county that's nearing 300,000 people. And so in that respect, I wanted to we've heard us talk about, I think, in some of the news releases, that this project is going to have 300 residential units on 5 acres. And this is, we mentioned that a half-acre lots would take close to 200 acres. So we went ahead and actually tried to find some examples. It was actually hard to find 300 single-family lots with half-acre lots that took less than 200 acres. They usually went a little bit over. So you can just see purely just a scale comparison of a neighborhood in town that has more of a suburban development pattern and the land that it takes up. I wanted to take, as we get into the land use element update in the next year, we'll be talking also about the impacts of roads. So the roads are about 4 miles of road to serve the same number of homes, and that has implications for construction of the roads and the water and sewer lines underground. So even, and a lot of times that involves disrupting, it inevitably involves disrupting the land. Congestion, every time we talk about infill, congestion becomes an issue. I want to just mention that I've come to think of population and traffic like a water balloon. You squeeze it one place, it doesn't go away, it just squishes somewhere else. So congestion, as we talk about infill, we talk about growth, becoming a more urbanized area. It's not going to go away. There's no solution. And I know the mayor, I think last night, it's almost like you gave my presentation a little bit. So you
didn't see it. Sorry.
Yeah, but we can't build our way out of congestion, basically. We can build wider roads. Thomasville is a good example. A lot of that growth that I've talked about since the 80s and 90s has occurred in the Northeast. So even if it's tempting to push growth out into the further reaches because it's not in anyone's backyard, it's not as visible. But when we do that, it just channels onto our main roads into town and results in roads being widened. And that's still going to happen, from time, that's still going to happen, but the goal is to mitigate it, to minimize it, not to prematurely move into the areas just because it's easier to do so. And we've had 50 years of state and local regulations, banking policies that make it easier to grow into the suburban way. So it takes more effort to try to change things and do it differently. And that I found an aerial. I was curious to see. This is the aerial, and the green are actually the impacts to the canopy that were removed as a result of widening the road from 2 to 6 lanes. So I wanted to make that point. It's not just the home sites, but the transportation network is hugely important as far as its impacts to the environment. And this is actually, someone sent me an image. This is Thomasville Road, 1970, north of Maclay. And I actually remember coming into town. My very first trip to Tallahassee was down Thomasville Road, and I was the same thing. Oh, I love this place. It's so full of trees. And then immediately the road was widened. So, so I understand. You know, but again, we're trying to balance, and that's part of why, you know, I'm passionate about the urban planning field, is because there's so many puzzle pieces, and we have to try to work together to figure out the best way to deal with the challenges. There's no perfect solution.
Sheree, real quick, Commissioner Proctor?
Sure.
Well,
Ms. Commissioner.
Mr. Mayor, I can wait till she concludes.
Great, thank you.
Well, I'm actually about to wrap up. I just put this image to wrap up my comments, and then I want Mindy to come and speak just briefly. And that is just to remind that this is a beautiful one of the urban vistas of what we're trying to preserve: the land, the ecosystem, the habitat. This is one of the goals, not only creating those vibrant places downtown where people love and socialize, you love to socialize and create memories, but also protecting these rural lands, which are so inherent in the beauty of this part of Florida. One of those, you know, one of the ways to preserve that is our urban forest master plan. So Mindy is behind me, and so she's going to take just a couple of more minutes to get you up to speed on the urban forest master plan.
Well, can I interject before she comes? Sir. One of the comments that Sheree has made really is a great setup for the comment that I like to make, in that she said that banking policies facilitated and made way for expansion and growth of American suburbs. And I agree with her. She's absolutely right. And white flight did occur with banking policies that made all of that occur. At the same time that banking policies in America facilitated suburban expansion, money was not invested in the traditional urban core areas. And so the strangulation of money circulating in the interior, where African Americans and poor people were left, was a catalyst for the 1977 CRA that Congress passed. And it was to try and break the logjam of redlining that was occurring by banks in America. And I appreciate the intellectual honesty of your point. But the point here is that our urbanization efforts of redevelopment should not solely be a focus to facilitate the suburban people re-entering and coming back into and gentrifying the folk who have been left for the last 50 years. And I am suspect in believing that our new urbanization thrust, or renewal, if you will, is now the U-turn of what banks did for the last 50 years. And now for those persons like Washington, D.C. coming back, and we're pricing out and we're possibly facilitating people who've remained there for 50 years to have to go out and live in Quincy or Monticello or Waukalla or something like that. That's not what I'm interested in as a commissioner. The notion of land trust for those properties ought to be with designated, and if you get a $23,000 piece of property, it ought not go to a $65,000 bidder. It ought to remain a piece of property. And as government, we're not taking a loss. And as the owner, holder of title over a piece of property, we ought to insist that whatever is banked is not placed necessarily in the general market, but that we should make sure that it is languaged to remain accessible and available to those people who've been trapped for 50 years and couldn't get out. And banks are still not pouring enough money into. So I think that our role is to facilitate and to help, because it's time for a new housing stock. It's time for a regeneration of that old infrastructure. And I think that government has got to be that engine. So I did not want us to go with rose-colored glasses in one way of thought. We've got to be holding land that it would be made available back to, reciprocated to community persons who have who otherwise won't find an opportunity at America's banks. You're absolutely right. America's banks have done a miserable job of helping everyone find housing. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Lindley, I know you wanted to make a comment on that before Cherie.
Okay, actually, I'm kind of interested in hearing about the urban forest management plan, but I will go ahead and just to your point of balance, a couple of weeks ago, I was very happy to have a tour of Cascades Park that Wayne and Ashley arranged for me to sort of look at the balance of what we're doing in terms of our green coverage, our canopy, and our urban forest, and partly in response to the complaints about the trees going down in the North American Properties site. And what I found out from Kenny Walsh, who is your city's wonderful manager of the parks, and he sent me a long note that I'd like to just put into the record. I won't read it, but one of the things that, some of the things it says is that in Cascades Park, we've planted 600 trees, 150 palms, 50,000 shrubs, and different kinds of ground covers. We have habitats that are both for animals and insects, pollinators, a wildflower area, all sorts of things that I think on balance are really hugely effective in helping offset right now and in the future some of the losses. And we all know, I think most of us have read recently about the reports, we actually have more tree coverage now. And Mindy, I'm sorry, I'm sure probably going to talk about that since I think I heard it first from you. But this is an amazing report that Kenny Walsh, a city employee, prepared. He's an arborist, and this is just really, I think, should be of great interest to people who are concerned that the landscape is being scalped. So with your permission, Mr. Chairman?
Yeah, I don't think there's any objection if we could have this reflected along with the minutes of this meeting as a part of the record.
We can, certainly.
Thank you, Commissioner.
I'll hand it over to Mindy.
Thanks, everyone. On the Urban Forest Master Plan, last March in 2017, the City Commission gave us approval to move forward with the development of the plan. And the master plan gives us the ability to identify concrete steps that we can take to make improvements to the health and sustainability of our urban forest and also in the way that we manage it. So in order to do that, the first step is to identify what we have, and so we've completed that step. We've done an urban tree canopy assessment and a sample inventory, and that tells us the current state of our urban forest. We really can't know how to improve until we know where we are right now. The point we're at now is finding out from the public what they'd like to see moving forward. So the community's priorities is what helps us inform the priorities of the goals that we make that are related to the improvements that our urban forest needs. And then the plan tells us how to get there. It's actionable steps that we can take in order to improve that health and improve the maintenance and management and decrease the amount of funds that we're spending on tree conflicts with hardscape and utility lines and stuff like that. It gives us the ability to make good planning decisions moving forward. So what we have so far is really very, very good news. 55% of our land in the city limits is shaded by trees. That's very, very high. There is no right amount of canopy. If there was, we would be the big winners. This is one of the highest amounts of tree canopy in the nation among comparable cities that have this study done. So this is very, very good news. One of the things that cities use these master plans for is often to grow canopy, so we're ahead of the game there. We're doing very well. The other thing people use these master plans for is to get community buy-in, to convince people that trees are important. Again, I think we can all agree we're way ahead of the game there. So really what we can focus on, since we have the quantity and we have the community buy-in, is the quality. what makes a quality urban forest for us? And then that's unique to Tallahassee. The timeline, we're in input and data collection. We have the data about our urban forest. There's lots of details to share, and they're really good. We're doing very well. I can't wait to share those with everyone. It's interesting, but it's also very exciting to see what we can do once we come from a place of information. The other part of the data collection is the community priorities. So we have public meetings scheduled for the beginning of next week, Tuesday the 27th and Wednesday the 28th. You can go to the city website to find locations for those meetings. We've also got a survey online that we'd like everyone to take to let us know about their priorities. I'm also available to come to any homeowners association meetings, group meetings, garden club, anything really, to give this presentation about our urban forest and have a conversation with everyone. I know it's hard to make public meetings, so just contact me in the planning department. I'm always available. Plan development will happen after we get all this information together, so we're looking at summer, May, July for plan development. Our consultant will provide a draft for us to look over, make sure it's along the lines of what we're looking for, and then we're looking at a final plan in late summer, early fall.
Commissioner Richardson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is excellent news, and certainly is the kind of thing that we want our community to learn, that is the direction that we're headed. I just wish this presentation had been made last night when we had a captive audience that thought we were becoming an Orlando, which we're not. And I hope that our local media will help us get this word out about what we are doing proactively to grow responsibly within that urban services area that Cherie talked about. And that's the dilemma that we face. How do we grow responsibly, taking into consideration the preservation of our urban canopy and preventing that urban sprawl that we do see in many of the large cities? It's a very difficult balance to achieve, but I think with what is being proposed here, we can do that. I guess my question would be, do you have an advisory committee that works with you that will be helping to develop the plan, and who will be a part of that? Because I don't want it to be one extreme or the other, but achieving that balance of those who realize that some trees may have to go and those that want to protect every tree without taking down even one. And because we do have to strike that balance. So will you have that, or will it just be the community meetings where you'll take input from community representatives?
We do have stakeholders. The community is one, but other stakeholders are representatives from organizations who interact with city policies regarding trees or influence city trees in some ways. So, for example, the Chamber of Commerce, the Tallahassee Builders Association, Sustainable Tallahassee, our FSU and FAMU have big campuses, and they're a big portion of our urban forest. So representatives from those organizations have been attending stakeholder meetings.
Okay. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you,
Mayor.
Commissioner. Commissioner Dozier, followed by Commissioner Miller.
Thank you. I think I concur with a lot of the comments here, and thank you for the presentation, Mindy and Cherie. This is very helpful. I think we have to keep in mind all of the other work that we're doing jointly, city and county, updating the land use component of the comp plan. Those types of things are really going to dovetail nicely with all of this information that you're learning about the urban forest, what we're doing on urban infill, what we're looking at in transportation. So this is really good timing. We're certainly growing, but we need to do it in a smart way. We've done that in the past, and it's time to update all those plans, and we're already in a long process and hopefully coming to fruition with some of that this year. So this is really good. And Mindy, you may not be the right person to answer this question, but when a developer, large-scale or single-family home, comes into a site, there are rules about when you take out trees, you have to replant or you have to pay into a fund. Can you speak to that point about how that may help support development in the urban forest? I mean, those funds coming back in, replanting, am I on the right track with that?
The tree bank is used for replanting if a developer can't fit all of those debits that he needs to make up on that site, he'll pay into the tree bank. And that's the same for all developments. They weigh the trees preserved against the trees removed, and that's how they get to that number.
That was my assumption. I'm going back a few years and doing this myself. So I think that that's an interesting component to add into this conversation where we see higher development in the urban area, that there is money coming in from those developments that will help to replant. And I'm going to guess that that has contributed some to the increase in the urban canopy. I mean, I'm probably not going back to 54, but at least in the last couple decades. So I think that program is really essential, and it's something to keep, for all of us to keep in mind as we see larger developments in the urban area. Is that right?
Those funds are used to fund both adopt-a-tree programs in the city and the county, as well as any other planting areas that are identified as priorities.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Miller, followed by Commissioner Lindley.
Mindy, thank you. I also wish you'd been there last night to give us this presentation. I wanted to say how happy I am to have you here. I didn't think anybody could replace Dan Rosenthal. I mean, he was just a fixture in our lives, and we love him dearly still. But you have definitely stepped up to fill his shoes, and I very much appreciate the work you're doing. My question is, how are you advertising these meetings on Monday and Tuesday? And I wanted to know if you had approached Kona. I think Kona is having, or have they just had a meeting, or are they about to have? If that meeting's coming up, it was either this week or next week, then maybe you might want to go there and make an announcement. And the other thing I would like to ask you to do is to contact the inner city neighborhood I guess the presidents of the neighborhood associations, and see if they can't. I realize it's Thursday and you're talking about next week, but if you can't push out information quickly to them to make sure that they know, because a lot of the folks that were here last night were from those neighborhoods. And honestly, I told them last night, I said, we have taken your names because you've all filled out cards. And if they did put, there were probably 20 people, and if they did put their email address, you might want to just get those and just send them a notice that, these meetings are being held on Monday and Tuesday. I'm not sure if it's Monday and Tuesday, but next week. And that way, people will really have an opportunity to come and make their comments, and you'll get a good showing. Thank you.
Yeah, I will.
Thank you. Commissioner Lindley.
Oh, just real quickly, I agree, Commissioner Miller. You can't underestimate how important it is to reach out. I mean, we've just heard that even though we have felt like we've been working on projects for a year or two, and then people say, oh, I just heard about this. So everything you can do for outreach. And I just want to salute the work you've done also. The Canopy Roads Committee that you direct has been working on this Urban Forest Master Plan for months and months and months, had really elaborate discussions, drafts of this, comments from every direction. And that is our city-county appointees. I've been sitting on that from the county for 5 years. And they have done a great job, and you have really elevated it tremendously to get this focus on not just saying no to trees coming down, but to replanting, to managing for the safety issues, and in every way making it a better canopy, not only the canopy roads, but the whole urban forest. So appreciate that so much, and outreach for anybody who feels we are just coming up with ideas off the top of our head. This is really important.
Great. We'll have Commissioner Proctor, and then maybe we'll move on. We're still on our first agenda
Mr. Chairman,
item.
I just caution that canopy roads are dangerous, and I think that their danger exceeds their aesthetic likingness by some people. Also, all these trees create asthma and coughing and what's that word? This time of year stuff. Yeah, allergies. And, this is just, we're over-romanticizing something that has a medical impacts on people for 2 or 3 months a year. And I'm sure that our allergists and those kinds of doctors do good this time of year. But I think that we have to look at not just trees, random, but we don't need them kind that drop all this green stuff everywhere. And I'm not supporting, and I'm not for a whole bunch of more trees that produce a lot of green stuff. So I think that we, in looking at this, we ought to be selective in things that balance the health and air quality, and not just a bunch of trees because there's a tree. Then, with respect to development, we should not create any kind of nooses that make for the development, the expansion and the growth of decent projects, and just create trivia and hoops for people to jump through over a tree. We really doing well with trees. We landed in Tallahassee 2 weeks ago, and I was just hoping that it was going to be some concrete for the plane to come down. It was just so scary looking coming down over the trees.
It's awful.
And everybody that lands here wonders at times, if you've not been here, where's the strip? Where's it going? And I think we're doing well. But those are the considerations, Mr. Mayor, members, commissioners, I have. Health, air quality, safety and the danger of canopies, as well as our need to keep free the highways for expansion and development of projects. And to have a bunch of people hop up and jump up over a tree when we are producing something that's producing millions of dollars worth of jobs, housing for people, all like that, we shouldn't even, So that's what we have to look at, y'all. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. And since he's wearing a Howard hat in FAMU country, you don't have to answer any of that.
Oh, man, that's so
I'm
low
messing
blow.
with you. Commissioner Dozier, followed by Commissioner Richardson, followed by Commissioner Ziffer.
Mr. Mayor, thank you. I know you wanted to wrap this up and move it on, but this is a critical conversation in what in the community right now, and a lot of different work we're doing. So I had asked about the tree bank earlier, and I was just made aware that I wanted to come back to North American property real quick because that has been in such a big conversation. So I think the point about Cascade, the tree that you made, and the replanting and the habitat there, we have to remember that was a brownfield. It's very critical. Over $200,000, probably $250,000, will come from North American to contribute to the tree bank, right? So that is a substantial contribution from the development that will help with the canopy in the future. And with due respect to our Howard friend, Commissioner Proctor, I think it is also important to know that the canopy reduces the heat island. It saves us all on utility costs. It has an economic value not just for our utility savings, but also the quality of life in the community and where people want to live. They don't want to live in an area, we'll pick on Orlando, it was already mentioned, that looks like they've taken out all of the trees. We have an opportunity to get ahead of this as we see more urban infill, and that's going to attract more people to our communities. So it saves, this is not just an environmental issue, that is critical too, but it's an economic issue in utility cost and in attracting and retaining talent in our community. So, thanks.
Thank you. Commissioner Richardson, followed by Commissioner Ziffer.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I'll be brief. I'm just really glad that we're having this conversation because I think what the community needs to understand is that, we care about this community as well. Those of us who have lived here all of our lives, I know Commissioner Proctor was born and raised in Tallahassee. I've lived here for many decades, and all of us. And we've chose to live here because we love this community and we value the assets and amenities that are here. We do what we do up here, partly because, I'd say almost exclusively because we care so much about this community and we want to see it grow responsibly and prosper. So I want the community to know that the community's priorities are our priorities because we represent the citizens that elect us to serve them. I don't know of anyone on this dais that has any nefarious objectives or hidden agendas when it comes to making our community better and moving it forward. And so I just want people to understand that we live here and we're residents of this community. We've chosen to raise our families here, and what the community's priorities are our priorities. But we're tasked with finding that delicate balance. And so I'm glad to hear that we're having this conversation this morning, so that our community knows that we share that same interest in preserving our urban canopy, and that we have a plan going forward for how to preserve that for future generations.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Ziffer.
Yeah, just very quickly, I just want to remind everybody, this has been some time, but remember that the Great Smoky Mountains emit more carbon monoxide than all the cars in the country. At least that's what Ronald Reagan said. So, Commissioner Proctor, I know that's a useless bit of information, but I thought I'd repeat it. It is. The other thing is, and I wish we'd had that last night, the visual of Cascades Park with the condominium behind it. 10 years ago when I was out raising money for the amenities, that's the one I used, and just about everybody in this community saw that in some form or fashion. So it's not that far off from what is going up from a visual standpoint. And so for those people that it came as a surprise, I'm sorry, but that visual has been out there a very long time.
Thank you.
Mayor.
Are we wrapped? Oh, Commissioner Miller.
I would just like to ask you to distribute your PowerPoint to our offices, if you would.
Yes.
Of course.
And I would just like to add one further comment.
I think we're on to the next item. So once you make that, you can go on to 3.02.
Perfect
Okay.
segue.
The CRA does have to adhere to all of the development regulations, including the new urban tree plan when it's adopted. There are no, like waivers that we're able to grant for cutting down larger trees or anything like that. I just want to make that clear because there were a lot of comments last night. I think there was some confusion on that. The next
Can
item.
I interject, Mr. Mayor, and that we have no waivers again, this is a noose that there's going to be a problem. And I can't think of Blairstone Road. I can't think of anything that trees got knocked down to build it. You have to just kill people now to say, let's just grow the trees back up over Blairstone. It'll happen in 7 years. Everything that has occurred and evolved, including Cascades Park evolution, people embraced, accepted it, and we replanted the trees and life went on. A tree is replaceable, can start over, all like that, but to put down because a certain kind of tree and a certain large size can stop a development is not wisdom. And I hope that when this comes back, that we need a trap door, an escape hatch for not allowing a tree that have already been living for 150 years, that done had 150 years. Jesus, how much longer do you get to allow progress to occur? I think 150 years a ripe old age for anything.
Thank you, Commissioner. Item 3.02.
3.02, Michael Parker was called to another meeting this morning. He was going to give you an update on the legislation, but I can do that. Basically, as you know, there were several proposals. Many of them matched the previous year's proposals at the legislature to regulate CRAs. Some of them were quite good. Some of them were reporting requirements, membership requirements, but those are requirements we already meet or exceed. Some of them would have affected the life of the CRA, but for reasons that are, I don't know, in the midst of the legislature, none of them passed this year. We do anticipate they will be back next year. We work with the Florida Redevelopment Association, of which Michael is currently the president, to try and clarify what CRAs do, what we're for, and we'll continue to do that. We'll continue to keep you updated on that information. We're ready for the next one.
Yes, ma'am, please.
Okay, 3.03, we're going to talk about the Art, Heritage, and Culture funding process. And I have a brief PowerPoint. What we're going to do today is give you an update on where we are. And we're very excited because that process will open on Monday. There have been a lot of people out there waiting for this process to come to fruition, and we finally have. I do want to remind you that this money was originally coming from tourist development funds that were intended for the development of the Performing Arts Center, and when that did not come to fruition, the county, the city, the TDC, the CRA were looking for ways to get that money back out into the community in a way that would enhance arts, culture, and the heritage of the community. The CRA CRA, the county, and the city did decide to go ahead and commit just over $2 million of that money to build a public event space and also amphitheater support space in the new Cascades project. And that is one of the reasons that this has taken a while to develop, because we wanted to make sure that if they did want to commit that money to that public function, they were able to do so, and we did that last fall. We've been working with our advisory committee. We have 6 great members. We have Cynthia Tunnicliffe, who was appointed for the Downtown Review Committee. She is our chair. We have Russell Dawes. He is with the Tallahassee Museum. He was appointed by the Tourist Development Council. We have Spencer Ingram, who's the chair of the COCA board. Claudia Devant, who was appointed by the DIA, and Ronnie Spencer Wright, who is our Frenchtown Southside representative. She's on our CAC, and Betsy Couch was appointed by KCCI. We've been working since December to develop guidelines, and one of the great things about this committee is they have done these processes before, so their experience was absolutely invaluable in helping us develop a good set of guidelines and a very solid application. Those documents are done. I'm going to be going over the schedule for you and the criteria, and what we'll do is on Monday, we will make that available to the public, since that's the official opening of the process. Now, for those of you in the audience who might be interested in applying, there are many ways that you can get this information, but what I would encourage you to do is to give your email address today to our CRA staff, and we'll be doing large mail-outs through COCA, TDC, and the CRA on Monday, but it will also be on the city website. We'll be advertising on the radio and in the Tallahassee Democrat. We hope to get good coverage, but we'll publicize it as much as we can. The goal being to reach out to everyone who might be able to apply. We're very excited about it, and we can't wait to see what this yields. So, the process opens on Monday, March 26th. Basically what that means is you'll be able to talk to CRA staff, get applications, any questions you may have. We're here. Email us, preferably email us. We're rarely sitting in our offices to answer the phone, so just make note of that. We will have one applicant workshop on Friday, April 6th. That will be in the afternoon. And we'll have another applicant workshop on Monday or Thursday, May 3rd at 6 p.m. We may add workshops. If we do, we will notify everyone. That would be based on demand. If we feel that people need more help with the applications, or there are more people and they can't make it to the workshop, we'll add a workshop. Please note that attendance at one workshop is mandatory. For us to accept your application, we need to know that you've been to a workshop, so please make note of that. The application deadline is roughly 2 months away. It's 4 p.m. on Thursday, May 24th, and that deadline is finite. I mean, that's it. We won't accept anything after that deadline at 4:03. I'm sorry, but we have to have a cutoff. We will have a Phase 1 review meeting the very next day, and that's a staff review. We want to make sure you've submitted everything that was required on the application. If there are any mistakes, for example, a missing signature or something minor, we're giving a 1-week review, a 1-week cure period, which would end on Tuesday, May 29th at 4 p.m. What we'll be doing during Phase 1 and during the cure period is just basically reviewing the applications to make sure they're complete. Okay, so this, as you probably recall, is a 2-phase process. Phase 1 is the simple review of the applications and the applying entity to make sure that they meet the requirements of Statute 125. It has a fairly clear list of things that can be applied for, but also you need to meet the requirements of the interlocal agreement between the City, County, and CRA that limits this to culture, heritage, and arts. That's a really broad category, but a good one. We want to make sure that you meet the legal requirements of those two, and we'll be talking to applicants about what that means. If the application doesn't meet the requirement, it does not move on to Phase 2. And our goal here is to get as many applications as we can and help them be successful. So we'll be available to answer questions again. We will notify the people who are successful in Phase 1 on Thursday, July 12th, and we'll do that via email. Or wait a minute, no, that's wrong. We need to go back. We will notify the people that will move on through the cure period at the end of June 5th. 4 p.m., we'll notify you if you're successful to move on to Phase 2. Phase 2 is basically using the criteria that was reviewed several times and adopted by this board to rank the applications, and the committee will be doing that work. I also want to remind all of you, and this is the City Commission, the County Commission, and the CRA Board, that when we open this process on Monday, basically the cone of silence will initiate, and that means please don't talk to anybody, don't discuss the process, please do not discuss the criteria, you cannot talk about this while we're in the review period. And the same information goes with the advisory committee staff, not the staff, but the advisory committee. So that's kind of important to note. We'll have our first review meeting on Thursday, June 7th, for the applications that move forward into the Phase 2 review process. And the second one, if we need it, will occur on June 11th. We'll have a Q&A session for the applicants because the committee wants to be able to ask them questions and make sure they clearly understand everything that's going on and what the proposals are. The Tourist Development Council will be reviewing their input. This is TDC money, so their input is essential. They'll be doing a review and comment, which will be conveyed to the City Commission, the County Commission, and the CRA Board. So the process is TDC review and comment will occur on June 21st. They will have the recommendations of the advisory committee at that time. And what the advisory committee will do is review and rank the proposals. Then it goes to the CRA board on July 9th, the County Commission on July 10th, and the City Commission on July 11th. And what we need from these three boards is an affirmative vote on how you want to rank and fund these proposals and projects. And we'll be providing you with ranking sheets and tools that you need to do that. If we get a consensus on the ranking, then we'll notify the applicants on July 12th via email that they are the successful applicants.
Will it come to us in rank order for?
Yes, it will.
So we're not ranking, we're approving the rankings.
Correct. You can approve or modify.
Got it. And in order for an entity or a recipient to receive the thumbs up, there must be agreement across which organizations?
All three, the City Commission, County Commission, and the CRA Board are all required to vote in the affirmative on this.
So if there are agreements on some and not on others, those that have all three will move forward?
Correct.
Got it.
Absolutely correct.
Commissioner Maddox.
Simple majority is the threshold to change or modify?
Simple majority.
Okay. Thank you.
Commissioner Richardson.
A couple of, so Roxanne, how many projects are we looking at potentially trying to fund?
Commissioner, we don't know yet, and we won't know until the application period ends and we get through the Phase 1 review.
Okay. So then the other question that I have, or maybe comment, is there are a lot of small, underfunded organizations in the community. The Tallahassee Boys Choir is one that comes to mind, African Caribbean Theater. They may not have the resources to compete for these funds, but because these are public dollars, I want to make sure that they have access to whatever it is funded out of that. I read Dean's proposal for a performing arts center. I know part of the discussion when we were talking about the community performing arts center is those same types of organizations having access to those facilities when they might not have the financial resources to be able to do it. So whatever is funded, I want to make sure that those organizations, and those are just two that come to mind off the top of my head. I'm sure there are others out there that are similarly situated, that they have the opportunity to take advantage of the projects that are funded.
Well, not only the projects that are funded, but the way the committee structured the process, the application, the criteria were given to us by the board, but basically everyone involved, including the board, has tried to make this as flexible as possible so that a small organization such as a boys choir, Tallahassee Ballet, can apply if they meet the criteria. So, and we'll go over those next.
Before you do, Commissioner Proctor, followed by Commissioner Dozier.
Well, I'm feeling like a complete failure And I view what we're doing here as a collective failure on our part. And, you know, it's sort of painful. We went to Nashville, some of us, and we saw centers and building, and we received messages that it took certain profiles in and of courage to advance. And this today is a collective failure on our parts, because we started off a few years ago with the dream, with the idea that we were going to move and this money would be utilized to help facilitate performing arts center. And we ain't did that. And this little giveaway, the first little who comes up and meet these arbitrary guidelines for qualifying, whatever that means, it just hurts. And I think that I'd like to see us quell this movement to do what we have been characterized many times for doing as a CRA, and have a little giveaway of our money, the people's money. This money should attain the vision that we set out to do. And I would like to see this money be retained for a while longer, as opposed to embellishing the perception of who we are and what we do, and that's just give money away to whoever qualifies that we deem qualified. We need to man up, stand up, woman up, and allow for this money to find a vision to secure what we started out for it to do. And maybe it takes a little more time for it to marinate. But I want it to be understood that I'm voting against this measure today because I'm not satisfied that we have gutted and grind and we have found and established the vision and reach for the mountaintop of where we were going. Now, with I've seen North American come in, and North American has shined, gave us a sheet of paper, and now they're creating all kinds of chaos by cutting down trees and all the things that come with that. But moving forward, and it's hard to believe that somebody not even from here can come in this town, say this is our vision, show us some paper. We say yeah, help them with some money about this amount, and that these folk are gonna, reach the mountaintop of what they said they were gonna do, and we ain't. How you feel if somebody come to your town and done something that you said you were gonna do many years ago and you didn't achieve it? I think that we seeing role models like North American ought to give us the impetus, the wherewithal, the guts to grind it out and make this dream a reality. We should not capitulate on that, y'all, even if it takes a little more time. I'd like to make a motion that we table this, Mr. Mayor, and that we give consideration to reaching our goal of having a performing arts center, or something that approximates that, more than just finding the first little organization to come up and we're going to give this money away because we couldn't do it. All of us collectively. I won't say I'm ashamed, but I am a little in disbelief that we can't attain all of our collective genius. Our governments, all like that, ought to be able to find a solution. I feel bad this morning, but I'm voting against this, but I do make a motion to table this, that we rethink our vision. I'm inspired by North American.
Thank you, Commissioner. Is there a second to the motion? Seeing none, we're going to continue with the presentation. Commissioner Dozier, you'll be first in queue once we complete the item.
Yeah, I think when we go through the criteria, this may answer some of the commissioner's questions. These are the phase 2 review criteria. These should look very familiar to you. Basically, the the advisory committee worked with these to rank them and provide a point process so we would be able to actually evaluate the applications. There are 9 criteria that we'll be using to provide the ranking. The first one is compliance with a cultural plan goal for funding and facilities. So basically, we're looking for sustainable public and private funding to preserve and improve the arts, cultural, and heritage organizations or experiences in the community. And that's worth 10 points.
What does that mean? That went all over my head. What does that first criteria mean?
This is language that's taken directly from the cultural plan, and it's one of their goals. I think they had 5 goals, and 3 of these are in the review criteria. We're looking for creativity here, so we're not trying to tell somebody that they have to come in and provide a building or this kind of experience. So the language is fairly broad, but if you're able to come in and propose a project, a facility, some kind of performance that meets any of these cultural or heritage goals or art goals, then that's something that can be in the application.
That didn't sound like what it said to me. I mean, you interpreted it, but that's not what it said.
Are any other commissioners unclear in the interpretation given?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, can we
Roxanne?
hear the
Thank you. Number 2 is compliance with the cultural plan goal for economic development. Everyone, I think, and COCA is in the lead on this with the TDC, would like to make Tallahassee known for the culture and heritage and arts that we have in this community. Part of that also is there's an economic development benefit. So we're looking for a project or program that could position and market the arts, culture, and heritage as a strategic partner in Leon County and Tallahassee economic development efforts. We're looking for public and private funding for arts organizations, or cultural assets. So if you're coming in with a program, does this promote that goal? Does it bring people to Tallahassee to see these performances or this building or this historical asset? The third one is compliance with the cultural plan goal for education, because I think everyone believes that arts education is essential for the betterment of people and the community itself. If you're coming in with something, be it a facility or a program or a process that does art, historic, or cultural education, then we'd like to see that. We'd like to see that application. The fourth one is potential for revenue generation to pay ongoing staffing, operations, maintenance, and organizational capacity and the financial stability of the applicant. One thing that we were very clear on when we talked about this before is neither the city nor the county nor the TDC can afford to pay staffing and maintenance and all of this on really anything new. This project or process would have to be self-supporting through either funding, external funding, something like that. So we're looking for that. We don't want to put any additional burdens on the taxpayers of Leon County or Tallahassee. Number 5, and Commissioner Richardson, this speaks to, I think, one of your concerns. How many arts, cultural, or heritage entities are supported by this use? Can other organizations, such as the Boys Choir, can they use this facility? Can they be a part of this program? The more other entities you're able to bring into your application, the better it will be ranked, because we think that's very important. The remaining criteria, okay. Potential number, excuse me, of citizens or visitors served by the use. Because it is TDC money, we know that it's intended to bring tourists to the county, right? So TDC will help us measure that, but we're also looking at how many citizens will be attracted to or served by this facility, this program, this process. The more, the better. We want this to affect as many people as possible in a positive way. The 7th is identifiable need. If we already have 10 of whatever it is you're proposing, then there's not a quantified need, there's not an unfilled demand. But if this is something new that we don't have that would meet these other criteria, then we'd like to see that as well. Impact of location on adjacent uses, both positive and negative. This, you get extra points if, for example, you're able to locate whatever it is you're proposing adjacent to some other use that it might build on. And this came from a discussion that the board was having about an arts district. And the last one is cost to build. And if you are proposing a facility, we need to know before this money is committed to that project that you've actually done your homework. So have you gotten your architectural estimates? What other money are you bringing to the table that would help support this facility or build this facility? And we will be verifying that. We don't encourage people to say that they're going to go out and raise money after the program is started. We're looking for people or agencies or entities that can walk in the door with some funding. So those are the criteria. Our board will be hard at work after the application period ranking it. We will keep you up to speed when we get the applications. We'll let everybody know. And we're looking forward to working with the community on this process.
Awesome. Thank you. Commissioner Dozier, followed by Commissioner Richardson.
If you want to jump in, Commissioner.
Go ahead. You were waiting patiently.
Thank you very much. Really appreciate the update, Roxanne. And I guess I wanted to start because it's the first opportunity we've had to meet since reviewing some of the agenda items at the county for other issues related to the CRA and changes we may make. At that point in time, we hadn't had an update on where this process was. So I had asked a question, and the board wanted, we had a majority vote to have this money be part of the negotiation with the county administrator and city manager. And I just, for the record, wanted to say, since that time, hearing the status of the application, where the advisory committee was, how much work has happened with, and I see Carrie Post in the audience and Audra Pittman, and how much you all have done in working with the CRA, I feel much more confident that we are in the right posture, that we're moving forward, don't want to slow that process down, and I think that's the recommendation from staff to our board next week. So again, I just wanted to clarify that at the time that we discussed this at the county, we didn't have this update and didn't have this information about how far along we were in this process. So that there's been some questions there, and I wanted to make sure everyone knew that I'm excited, but personally, I'm sure others are, that we are moving forward, and I think this is the right approach. This has been a 2.5-year process since the money was moved into the interlocal agreement with the CRA. So to Commissioner Proctor's point, I would have loved to see $114 million or $180 million or $80 million Performing Arts Center built, but the numbers weren't there at the time, and this 1 penny of bed tax wasn't going to go far enough to build that center. I think long-term, that is still a goal that we should absolutely have, and we should support it. For me, starting with, and I think for all of us, with the amphitheater, funding that, we have seen the activation of arts and entertainment in our community and attracting more visitors. We've seen year in, year out growth in the TDC funding, which is phenomenal. So these are steps in the right direction, and a new theater, galleries, whatever the ideas that might come back, we know there's a lot out there. I think will move us in that direction so that at some point, hopefully not in the too distant future, we could support a true performing arts center. But I don't think we're there at this moment, and $3 million can't cover everything. We've already used some of the money to do the green rooms and other space that was necessary at Cascade. So just to hit that point, I don't think this is instead of, this is just a incremental process, which may be frustrating for some, but it helps us in the right direction. So with those comments, I am really thrilled to see the, that's a robust list, the 9 points. I think the cultural plan items are critical. That was work we did back in 13, 14. So Roxanne, I guess just 2 quick questions on this. Obviously, any grant application point structure, an organization may hit 7 of the 9 elements really strongly, maybe not so much 1 or 2, but it seems like the financial sustainability and the ability to bid, I mean, obviously those have higher point counts. Those are 2 things, as you said, that are very critical in use of this money. We want to see it activated as quickly as possible. So I see the distinction in the 5 points versus 25 or something like that. But do you believe the committee is going to look more, scrutinize those two items more than the others? It needs to hit all these various needs, but without those two pieces, it seems like it would be very challenging for a proposal to move forward.
So we also understand, and we discussed this at the committee, that there hopefully will be projects that are construction or programs, and we'll be looking at those a little bit differently. A program would not be penalized if they, under cost to build.
Right.
We don't rank that quite the same way. So hopefully we'll get a range of applications that we can look at, but we are aware of that distinction. But the reason cost to build has so much emphasis on it is because before we commit that $3 million or $500,000, whatever it is, we want to make sure that it will actually get built. And we don't want to have to wait 2 or 3 more years. So that's why that's in there.
Okay. Well, I think it's a critical piece, and I appreciate your work and the committee's work, everyone, for really being very thoughtful about those criteria. I guess it's also at the committee's discretion, and the mayor asked this question earlier, whether or not we'll get a recommendation for how things are ranked. When you say ranking, it could be the committee's top choice for $3 million, or they could look at this and say, well, you've applied for $3 million, but we think this project could get $2 million, and we could fund this project at $500,000 and this project at $500,000, and kind of spread out the impact of these dollars. Is that something the committee has discussed?
Yes, we have. And because we don't really know what we're going to get, we can't tell you yet how that will stack out. It really depends on the merit of the individual applications, but it could be one project that gets $3 million or 10 projects that get, $500,000. We just don't know yet.
Okay. And lastly, and I think, I'm not sure if it was the mayor, Commissioner Richardson, someone mentioned this earlier, if there is not consensus between the CRA, city, and county commissions, and by that point, I'm not sure how long this process is going to take, but the county may not be sitting at the table with CRA, so it may be 2 conversations with city and then coming to the county commission. Because those are our last meetings before September for all 3 bodies, if we did not have full consensus, it's probably important to let the community know, the applicants know, that the next opportunity we would have to look at, to come back to have some other conversation would be in September. Is that right?
That is correct. Okay. And we are hoping, though, hopefully it's all very clear and we get a consensus before everybody goes on break.
I think it just may be helpful to add that in to the list, so because people are used to us having more frequent meetings, and because this is right before that summer break, we don't want to surprise everyone by saying if it doesn't happen in July, then you have to wait a couple months. Yeah. So just a thought. But great work on all parts. I'm very excited to see what applications come in. I know we've got some great ideas out there. Yeah. Thank you, Mr.
Mayor. Commissioner, by the way, there is no action required here, correct?
There's no action.
This is an update. Commissioner Richardson?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a very quick question. Roxanne, are the point totals hard and fast at this point?
Given the expertise on the advisory committee and the amount of time and work that they've put into this and the ranking, I would strongly suggest that they be, unless there's a...
Yeah, no, you've answered my question. My point is that there were 5 points for the collaboration, and I think that that's going to probably be the best opportunity for some of the organizations that I talked about to enter into this process, and how many points you assign to that speaks to the value that you place or the priority that you put on it. And so that the reason I asked that question was, is there a way to put maybe more emphasis on that kind of, because I really believe that's the entry point for a lot of these underfunded organizations. But I will say this, when it comes to the city commission and to this CRA board, that's what I'm going to be looking for, because I just don't think a lot of them are going to have the wherewithal, staffing-wise, expertise, maybe to compete with, some of the projects that we've heard and read about. but I'm hell-bent on them participating in this process.
Well, what I will do is, a couple of our board members are not available today, but I can email everyone. Okay. And if they're amenable to it, then, they can assign more or move the points around a little bit. And we'll know on Monday, because that's when we have to send all of this out. And we'll be sending all of you the guidelines and everything that we're sending out to the public as well, just so you'll have it. But I totally understand what you're saying. I think it's a really good point. And I will get back with the advisory committee and let them know.
Thank you. Commissioner Proctor. Thank you, sir.
I'll defer to Commissioner Miller, and I've spoken a lot, and I'll defer to her.
Commissioner Miller.
Well, we were just discussing where this board interacts with the decision ultimately. And what my conclusion was, and I shared this with Commissioner Proctor, was basically that we can't in the next 30 minutes come up nearly to the amount of time and effort and thought that these folks have sat down and worked, like what have they been meeting every Thursday afternoon for 2 months? And there's no way we can, second guess them in a half hour. So, but I do understand that it's going to come back to the CRA, the city, the county, and there will be an opportunity to have input. So just validating that. The other thing that I wanted to say is that, a lot of times there are ways to help an individual or a group or an organization to get a foothold. And my whole criteria for this money has from the beginning been something permanent. And if we are trying to establish a place, for example, where these arts groups could rehearse and perform, when they came before us and did such an amazing job. And I had to remind myself they were actors, and that's why they were so well organized. But that is another thing I'm going to be looking at, is how is this going to help these groups? How, on a permanent basis, how is this going to help them to advance their presence, to make them more high profile, to make people more aware of how, the boys choir comes to mind, of how incredibly talented they are. And so how can we make sure the most people are able to see that and then support them on their own. And so I hope we're thinking of that permanence element and being able to help them that way, because I am really interested in helping organizations get started. And that's something we've talked about when we've talked about events before. And I've always wanted money for new events and so on. And so just keeping that permanence, that I want to build something that's going to last and going to serve these organizations for a long time.
Commissioner Proctor.
Thank you, Chairman. Are we going to, you mentioned that the 3 categories, history, culture, and arts, if I heard you right. Are we putting $1 million in history, $1 million in culture, and $1 million in arts?
No, sir, we're not. We're just keeping that, $1 $3 million pot, if you will, because we don't know what's going to come in. We don't know who's going to apply or what they're going to apply for, so we didn't want to break it out, because if one entity comes in and they're able to put together something that does, like Commissioner Miller was saying, or Commissioner Richardson, where they're serving a lot of different community groups, we don't want to limit that if that's the best application or the only application. So we're trying to be as flexible as possible.
So one applicant could hog up all the money, is what you were saying?
If they meet the criteria, it's possible that, we might get an application that would get all $3 million, but I don't know yet until they actually apply.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Commissioners. Are there any additional updates before we move?
Just one very quick update on the outreach. I thought this was important for everybody after last night's commission meeting. There was a lot of concern, very valid concern on behalf of the public, that they were not aware of the Cascades project. And I did want to just reassure people, especially the board members, and let you know that the outreach on this project and the coverage from the media and the different entities was huge. I mean, I think we actually did more discussion on this possibly than on Gain Street. So we've prepared a little summary, and I had a very detailed summary available back there for the public. Anybody that wants to know, how many broadcasts we had in this, how many YouTube views, how many Tallahassee Democrat stories, we've got that information. We've got the dates. We've got radio and television stories. The press outreach was tremendous on this process from the developer as well as just staff. There's a separate website created with automatic updates. And I just wanted to reassure people that this was not covert, this was not secret. This was probably the most discussed process we've had in years. And that information's available if you need it, and that's all. I just wanted to let you know it's there.
Thank you very much. Commissioner Miller.
Roxanne, one of the things that was expressed last night, and I'm sure this, since we're at CRA, and CRA was the one that applied for the permit and so on and so forth, one thing that came up was that the next day after the permit was issued that this occurred and that it happened really fast. And so could you clear that up for us?
I'm glad you asked that. The permit was applied for in mid-February. The CRA does not review demolition permits. That is not what we do. That is done by growth management following adopted city regulations. They went through the regular process. We don't really play a role in that. So the approval came out in whatever amount of time. I think it took a couple of weeks. I think it's important to note that they got their permit on March 9th. But they did not start demolition until approximately a week later. Most developers, as you know, when you get your demolition permit, you are out there that day, you are on the site, and you're clearing that site. They waited almost a week before they started doing the demolition, and there were a number of reasons for that. Public comment was one. The developer was busy with other projects, but there was no rush. There was no secrecy or dead of night. They followed city rules, and it's just a fact, and it's a verifiable fact.
All right, we are on to minutes. Is there a motion to approve the minutes?
Move consent.
There's a motion on consent. I think we only have.
So moved.
That's it.
Yeah. All those in favor, let it be known by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. Motion passes. Item 5.01.
Can I ask a question real quick?
Yes, sir.
Before we go on?
Yes, sir.
Just real quick, I think this meeting's running a little bit longer than we expected. I know there's a lot of people here that are here on 5.02. And I think Commissioner Richardson may have some things he has to handle.
That's fine.
If we can take up 5.02.
We can. In fact, as I was going through this and at the pace of this meeting, the next meeting we may experiment with moving the votes prior to the updates and the information items and see how that works, especially for those who may be time constrained on the back end. Commissioner,
thank you.
We're going to take up item 5.01 before 5.02 before taking up 5.01.
And before staff starts, I think the mayor just made an excellent point there. And if it needs to be formal action to be taken to make that happen, let us know. I think having those votes happen soon after the public comment is invaluable because, I mean, I've almost forgotten who the speakers were.
Sure.
But I did take some notes. So if we can make that happen, I don't think there'd be any objection at this board in us doing that. So if we could have those votes taken prior to the updates.
Appreciate that.
I think we can do that.
Item 5.0, Commissioner Ziffer.
I just wanted to let you, Mr. Mayor and staff knew this, 11:30, I have to leave.
Yeah. Me too. And that, again, that is the point around ordering this in a way that is accommodating to the fact that we have votes. Now, we partly have something to do with that. And so in the future, we're going to try and experiment with this just slightly differently.
Mr. Mayor, could you please, when staff presents this, I'd love to hear feedback immediately from Commissioner Richardson as he has championed this, and I'd like to know his perspectives of balance in terms of what we hear.
All right. If we can start with the presentation, please.
Yes.
It's ready. Yes, Mayor. I have a presentation for you all, but if I know we're running behind on time, if you want me to present it, I can go through it. It's about 22 slides, or I can just give a very brief presentation.
Yeah, so we've had this for a couple of years. We may be at a point where we can begin with commission discussion. I'll yield the floor to Commissioner Richardson.
Speakers?
I assume we took speakers.
Took speakers already.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
yeah.
I would just move the item.
Second.
Second.
There's a motion and a second on approval. Discussion.
Discussion.
Commissioner Miller.
I heard one of the, there seemed to be a consensus or a sense of, in the comments, that this was just randomly selected, and I think if you could elaborate on the process we have to go through by statute in order to establish an area as a CRA area. And also, I'd like for you to elaborate on your reason for going beyond the recommendation that came out of the Citizens Advisory Committee.
Fair enough.
I guess I'll take care of that quickly. Basically, in order to be added to a CRA, we have to create a finding of necessity. The state statute provides several different criteria that we can use for that process. You have to meet, at least here in Tallahassee, we do 2 or more of those criteria. All of these locations met the criteria in different ways. Some of them are a little bit different, but they met the criteria. These were selected because one of the areas, South Side, South City, is something we've been looking at for years, and we know that there's affordable housing opportunities there, things that we like to support. Hang on a second, I'm blanking out on a couple of them. The bond, the second one, was part of an existing neighborhood where we know we can do some improvement there. We know there's also a need for redevelopment in that area in terms of affordable housing, which is going to be our new focus. And the Spring Hill Road area, we do try and include commercial or future commercial so that we can generate the revenue in redevelopment to do the affordable housing and the other public improvements that we'd like to do, because we know that our opportunities to expand a CRA will more than likely be very limited in the future by the legislature. We wanted to try and get this in while we had it on the table and while the board is expressing interest in doing this. Because when we look at the CRA, we look at future revenue as well as just current existing conditions. Now, regarding the advisory committee, when we went to them in June, we did not know that there would be an opportunity to expand the life of the Frenchtown Southside CRA, and that's coming about via the negotiations between the city and the county about the restructuring of the CRA. Had we known that, we would have recommended all 3 at that time, and they would have been able to have a discussion that included that, but they didn't know, we didn't know. Their concern was, you know, why are we adding these extra areas when they may absorb a lot of money? We didn't know we'd have more money and more time. Now that we do, we'd like to take advantage of that opportunity. And the city is working on a program to do a fairly comprehensive redevelopment improvement program in the South Side. So why not put this on the table now? If the board's interested in doing it, it's an opportunity we may not have a year from now.
And to follow that up, I wanted to say that I have been opposed to advancing, other than moving to the other side of the street on South Monroe Street, I have really opposed adding anything to the CRA before now, because I felt that the folks who have been in the CRA area all this time are just beginning to see a return on the investment to the point where all these public amenities can be added. But given the change in the time frame, and also the fact that South City is a very high priority for the city, and also the Promise Zone. The other areas are in the Promise Zone, and that's been analyzed separately. So that is the reason why I'm going to be supporting this today.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Nick Maddox, followed by Commissioner Dozier, and
yes.
Commissioner Lindley.
Thank you. Just real quick, I know this is a very big and important decision that we are making today, and I don't want the public at all to think that we're doing this without giving careful consideration to what we're trying to do. Just a question for the folks out in the audience that may be here on this subject, or even others. If there any interest of those in the audience to see some of that presentation? Because if so, just for the sake of how important this decision is, I would like for them to have that consideration. So just, is there anybody in the audience that would object to us going ahead and taking up this motion?
We can, and obviously we can make the presentation available following the vote as well. We have taken public comment on this, which would have been the time to take the public pulse. And I think we got good feedback from folks.
Right, and we're available to answer questions after the meeting, or you can call or email us.
Just my only concern is that, I mean, this is a huge decision. I think we're all on the same page on this. I brought it up a few years ago. It didn't go through. I'm glad to see that the board is at a place that we're going to pass this thing and help out those Sac City folks. And I appreciate Commissioner Richardson for his leadership and push so hard on this subject. So I just want to make sure that if there's any questions of those in the audience, that we do address those, and that we don't make people think that we're just pushing through this without any thought or consideration, because we have talked a lot about it.
Thank you. Commissioner Dozier, followed by Commissioner Lindley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Commissioner Maddox, I appreciate your comments there. I know there was one person who was interested in having more information, and while this has been going on for a long time, and I'm glad that the studies have been done, I do understand why staff is recommending expanding to all three, given the length of time, or the extension of time and dollars for the CRA. The concerns that have been raised have been my concerns all along, and I think a lot of us have shared, that Commissioner Miller and Commissioner Maddox just mentioned. We have some renewed energy in Frenchtown, which is fantastic. With the shelter property, we're coming probably, hopefully, to a plan coming forward soon to redevelop that property, or some process there. But we have not looked, from my perspective, holistically. I know the city is working on an assessment in Frenchtown and other places, looking at the community plan, other things, but drawing money away from that area remains a concern, I think, for a lot of us. So, and it's not just about drawing money away, it's spending the money we have. We've generated a lot of money in Frenchtown South Side from development on Gain Street and others. It's time to start investing in that area in a more holistic way. So we're all keenly aware. I mean, the elephant in the room is, again, as we said before, this may be the last time your county colleagues get to sit here and have comment on this. So I feel like it is important right now, and I will share for the record, I was the sole vote against pulling out of the CRA, because I do think this is we have one city, one county, and we overlap in our funding and our needs, and everything is interdependent. And I think it is invaluable, as long as these meetings take, and as much as we may debate at times, it is invaluable for us to have times to come together and talk about these projects jointly, whether it's Blueprint, CRA, or others. So I am going to miss this time with the City Commission to sit and talk about these issues, and I hope we find other ways to do that in the future, should the county not be part of the CRA board. So with that said, a holistic plan for Frenchtown is really critical. And I'm really struggling right now with adding all three areas. Again, I understand staff's recommendation. If the CAC had been able to discuss this and dig in a little bit more, we may have more community comments, other things like that. I don't want to hold up the process. This has been going on a long time. We have gotten a lot of input, but I'm interested in the comments of others, whether or not we can pair this expansion with direction to have a more formal approach and a planning approach in Frenchtown. I think that may be a good thing to get in the record right now, and to really have a more strategic approach to that and a timeline, so we're not just talking about it at every meeting or thinking about it all the time without seeing some action there. So that is one comment. The other would be, I think, on the other side of this, with the expansion of the Blueprint project, we have just gone through a few months of talking about Spring Hill and Lake Bradford and other areas. The assessment of Spring Hill, with how much public property was on that track, it was really interesting in the right-of-way discussion. I think it does lend itself to some redevelopment, but we have all talked about, and Commissioner Richardson, I think you were hit this point pretty hard at the Blueprint meeting, and I agree, we don't want to push residents out. It needs to improve the neighborhood for the people who are already there. So I do think there is some opportunity for some redevelopment that could contribute back to the CRA on Spring Hill. So that one is of interest to me, even though it's not generating a lot of money right now, given what we just did on Blueprint. So again, I'm fence sitting on this a little bit. I think I understand the justification for moving forward with all three, but I think we have to have a strategic plan to finally get some work done in Frenchtown, and I think we have to be very careful in all of these areas. Commissioner Proctor, you mentioned this earlier, many people did, that we are improving it for residents who've been there a long time, who've been working on their own neighborhoods, improving the safety, improving their homes, and not just replacing it with other types of new development. So yeah, I'll leave it there, Mr. Mayor. May come back in a moment, but I'd love to hear the other comments.
Commissioner Lindley, followed by Commissioner Proctor. In respect for time, if there are others, please let me know now. Commissioner Miller, and then we'll take the vote.
I'll be real quick, and congratulations to Commissioner Richardson. I think this will be like giving birth if we get a vote on this today, since you brought it up, I think, when I first met you in the 80s. Just speaking to Commissioner Dozier's concern about possible taking away from other areas in Frenchtown and the holistic nature, two things that make me feel comfortable in supporting all three is that we have had a problem, I think, in the past of attracting people who have ideas, who want to invest in the South Side in general. And we are now going to expand that area greatly to more people who own property or who have ideas who might be able to work with the CRA. So I really like the expansion into these areas. You're going to get quite a lot of the South Side, and I think that's something both the county and the city are working on, just as we are affordable housing. I think we work on it separately, we work on it together. And the other piece of the holistic nature, which is the ultimate, the sine qua non of Blueprint, is that particularly the Spring Hill Road piece, I think will be compatible with some of the work that the Blueprint is going to be doing in that vicinity. So I do like expanding the area. It draws more people with ideas for investing in that area and addressing blight, which is our chief concern, but also economic development and so forth. So I'm going to be supporting Commissioner Richardson's longstanding good idea. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Proctor, followed by Commissioner Miller.
Kudos to Commissioner Richardson for championing and doing a great job, helping us to bring this measure hopefully to fruition. And as we vote on this matter, we are launching, we've postured our staffs to pursue the designation of on the CRA. Is that accurate? That's what we're doing, right? Okay, good. During the spring break, I did a little driving around, and I noted that city crews were in the Myers Park neighborhood, 2 or 3 different ones, sidewalks, resurfacing, and other work crews. And I was just wondering if we could get some right now money in South City as well, south of Magnolia. And are we consigned and constrained to waiting for the years to pass before we capture dollars out of the CRA before work can be done in South City? Trucks are there today. You should drive over there. I have. And the city is doing a noble job resurfacing and re-sidewalking Myers Park, and not a single truck is in South City. If there's a way that we could get some right now money and not have to wait forever, I would nominate that to be a part of the right now process.
Thank you. Commissioner Miller.
Well, just to answer that, and I think that Commissioner Richardson could answer this too, we have in this year's budget work on Putnam, and Putnam was resurfaced fairly recently, but it's very important to us to put a sidewalk along Putnam because it really is a major thoroughfare there. And also Polk. Both of those are in South City, and those are in this year's city budget. And also, as you know, in Blueprint, we are looking to move forward fairly quickly with the Blueprint project that was ranked highly. So there's a lot of discussion actually that went on last night about the South City area and the things that are being done. So just that, I didn't mean to say that, but the comment I wanted to make is related to Commissioner Dozier's comment and our meeting together. One of the things I've discovered over time is there's so many things we talk about on the city side that you all don't have privy to the conversations, and you need to know the information. And this wide awakening to me came when there was a 5,000-gallon diesel spill that was portrayed to the community as being 600,000 gallons of fuel, as if you could cover that up. But and immediately I sent out information to the county commissioners to let them know the reports we had been getting back related to that. But that's just one thing. The airport, the bus system, all these things that are going on that you all are honestly held accountable for. I mean, everyone knows we're all elected, but nobody knows what we're elected to, and most people in the community really don't know whether we're city or county, and really it kind of doesn't matter except on this information piece. So I think somehow we've got to figure out a way to keep y'all updated. And specifically to the Fringetown plan, there is an effort that has been going on for, 6 months, I suppose, ever since the sale of the Standard, the property to the Standard. And I would love to invite Commissioner, well, all of you, really, but if you want to come to one of our meetings, we're having a meeting tomorrow morning over at the Renaissance Center, just to get an update on what the effort is and what's been done before. We had a charrette that lasted 2 or 3 days to get community input, and Devin Levins in the planning department is available, in your planning department, is available to come to see all of you and let you know the status of that effort, because that is really the effort that you all have been, are saying that you're asking for. So I think it's important that you know that what the status is, and honestly, I'd be interested in hearing your input on the effort itself.
Well, I just say that 6:30 a.m. we always designate our fearless leader, Nick Maddox, to represent us.
Okay.
At 6:30 a.m. breakfast, Nick.
Nice. I believe that was the last comment in queue, and I do know 2 of us will be leaving in a few moments. There is a motion and a second on the floor. All those in favor, let it be known by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. Motion passes unanimously. Again, want to add my congratulations to you, Commissioner Richardson, for really running this into the ground. It's been a number of years, but we're here. Commissioners, we're now on item 5.01.
Commissioners, I can be brief with this for you. So this is a
staff recommendation.
Pardon?
Second.
There's a motion and a second on staff recommendation. Commissioner comments, Commissioner Dozier.
Which item are you
Quickly.
on? Are you dropping back?
Oh, well, yes, back on 5.01, Commissioner.
Do we have a quorum still?
5.
If not,
You
can
have
we vote
6.
before Commissioner?
You have 6.
He's got to go.
You have quorum.
Commissioner
I'm sorry.
Commissioner Dozier.
Yeah, there was a little bit of noise there. It's a quorum of the full board. This is not a board where we count city and county, correct?
Right.
So long as we have 5.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Just wanted to make sure of that, because these 2 items I think are pretty critical. The last item, I don't want to miss that as well because the timing issue. So just letting everyone know, Mr. Mayor, I know you know that in case we run out of time here with the quorum. So for the demolition, I think the comments that were made earlier, and it's in line with some questions I asked during briefing, are really critical. It's not just the historic nature of the community.
Mayor.
And the salvage issue is a really good point to have been brought up. But I do think, and I talked about this with Roxanne and Rick in our briefing, that while, as was mentioned earlier, most of the houses that come into this program will have gone through a code enforcement process. They will be deemed unsafe. They have to be torn down, and perhaps that gets to some of the salvage. There may be a few homes within this mix that could be remodeled, could be stripped to the core. Homes used to be built with much sturdier wood, and if the walls and the roof come off, I wonder if that could be reused to be remodeled or repurposed and salvaged. I know this is tricky when it comes to private property rights and other things, so I would be happy to make a motion for this item with 2 additions, and I'm going to look for some staff direction on this, on how you would like this. I'm sorry?
There's a motion already on the floor.
I haven't asked my questions yet about 2 additions yet.
So this would be, you want a friendly amendment or you want a substitute?
I'm sorry, there's already a motion on the
Correct.
floor.
Motion
Forgive
and a
me, I
second.
did not hear that. So, well, let me get staff direction, and I'll ask if there's an amendment, or I'll make a substitute here. I think the specifics of affordable housing is critical. That we talked about this when this item first came up, that we don't just want to see demolition, but we want it in our policies, whether it's in this policy or a companion, that we want to see affordable housing, and these properties go into the land bank or trust should it be created between city and county or something of that nature. So I think formalizing that direction to staff, that to come back with, if it needs to be a companion policy, to come back with something that really says when these homes come down, when these lots are vacant, that we look to organizations that can rebuild. There may be a number of those, private sector that can rebuild private housing, or affordable housing, or go into the land trust. I think that would be a critical piece. But also, I would really like to have a piece of this policy, an assessment of programs from other communities on the salvage of houses and remodeling. If there could be a way for an owner or family to donate a house, they can't afford to remodel it, they can't afford the code violations, liens, whatever it might be, perhaps they could convey that to a program where someone else could take ownership and do the remodeling so it doesn't have to come down. And I think this really gets to the character of the neighborhood as well. We don't want to see all of the older homes go and have a cookie cutter neighborhood. So again, Roxanne, if you don't mind just giving me some direction here on those 2 pieces, would they be direction to staff to bring back a program on how to salvage this, companion policies? How do you see that working?
Probably the best thing is to go ahead and approve the recommendation today, because really we're looking at property that it's in private ownership or it's too far gone to save no matter what. But staff definitely has heard, from several of you in the briefings and in conversations, a desire to try and facilitate affordable housing, save homes that contribute to the character of the neighborhood. We've talked to growth management. They would play a key role in this. Code enforcement would as well. What we'd like to do is get together and work with everyone and come back with a separate program that addresses this. It would dovetail into this program, but there's actually more to this than just the demolition of the house. So we'd like a chance to address that comprehensively. We also have looked already at other cities that have this kind of rehabilitation program for private homes. That might be a separate program that the CRA works on, but let us take a comprehensive look at that and get back with you.
If you could also include in what you bring back something around the, obviously there's the ownership piece that we have to address. In many cases, these are landlords that either we can't find, you can't get access to title, the real public policy implications of going on somebody else's land, refurbishing, if you will, under whose ownership and whose profit, without it being a full taking by the government of the property. On the reuse piece, I completely get. So I look forward to seeing what you all bring back. Commissioner.
Sorry, I wasn't quite finished.
Oh, of course you're not.
Yeah.
And then Commissioner Lindley, you're next.
Really?
We really do need to get to a vote if we can get our comments out and then get a vote before we lose 5 of us.
I appreciate that, Ms. Mayor, but these are very important issues. We spent a lot of time off agenda earlier. So I do think it is good, and based on the public comment, to get it into the motion, if the maker of the motion would be amenable to bring back what you just described, Roxanne, programs that look at affordable housing, separate program for saving homes and rehabbing private property, and to your comments, Mr. Mayor. But I will say in our briefing, Roxanne, you and Rick said this was just an estimate, or a anecdote perhaps, out of 50 homes, maybe 1 or 2 could be remodeled. So Yes, the homes that we're looking at in this program, a majority of them would need to come down, but I do think it would be important to look at this program, the homes that are in there, and also do that assessment based on your comments the other day.
Right.
So if there is going to be a tie with this program.
Quickly on point.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'll accept that amendment. Also
Thank you.
on point to what Commissioner Dozier is saying, a few years ago I had the opportunity to take a housing tour across the nation, or at least across the East Coast, at some of the housing authority properties and other blighted neighborhoods that were now flourishing. And one of the things that I learned is that a lot of times in these land banking situations, when it comes to what happens with that land, is oftentimes they don't resell it. What happens is the governmental entity or even the housing authority holds that land, gives the developer a 99-year lease on the land where they can build on top of it, and specifies to the developer what percentage of it needs to be affordable housing, even if all of it needs to be. And that's a way that we can be sure that affordable housing stays on the land. And so ideas like that also, if you can look at what other places have done in partnership with housing authority, or even holding on to land and giving leases, long-term leases to developers to develop on top of the land. If there could be some kind of synopsis on how that works as well, or if we could look into that being something that we do as well.
Commissioner Lindley, you were next in queue, followed by Commissioner Proctor.
Okay, I was really appreciative of a note we got from Matthew Latch. I thought it was very thoughtful, and I really liked his concerns about it when dilapidated homes come down, we have empty lots that just become problem areas for long periods of time. So I think that, to try to mitigate that's really urgent. We don't want that to, something bad comes down, but we leave it there for weeds and corruption. And also, I appreciate very much, Commissioner Maddox, your expertise on this and what other communities have been doing. I think one that was mentioned was the Baltimore Homes for Sale. So there are a lot of different ways to approach the affordable housing. Definitely. So I'm happy to support, and I know we're early days on this, so I know you all on the staff have a lot of work to do, but a lot of great ideas coming forward.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Proctor.
I respect Commissioner Dozier's effort to incorporate into Commissioner Maddox's motion that her ideas should be captured in the primary understanding and not as a secondary agreement. Excellent stuff. I think that we, in an earlier item, determined one of the 9 variables for qualifying for cultural history or that type loan or grant would be based on the 9th element was your financials and your ability, your stability to show that you could, sustain. I think that we should likewise in this, when the land becomes clear, create a financial element that we're not selling property to a super big potential developer and those who hire people to go in and hoard the property and gather it. And it's always the look of someone small but representing someone huge. And once they amass it, the way it works in Washington, D.C., before you know it, some super big comes out of the closet and who you thought you were selling, and they take control of it. So I like to see some effort financial, the people who are striving to get the property out of the land bank or purchase or however we acquire it, that they would not be super bigs, and that we would use a financial element to qualify people who can get that dirt.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Miller.
Thank you, Mayor. I wanted to make absolutely sure my understanding is that after this money is used to take a property down on a private piece of property, there's a lien on the property, correct? And it has to be settled at some point in the time in the future, maybe when the property's sold?
There are several different ways, yes, to get that money back. Some is a lien, some are fines that accrue but can be waived. It just depends on the circumstance.
Okay,
some of it's privately owned, some of it's not.
All right, and finally, the next meeting, we're talking about some come back and bring us more information, but I'd like to be a little more specific than that. And I'd really like to hear more about the land trust at our next meeting. We heard a tremendous amount yesterday afternoon, and I think the staff's going to be working on that anyway for the commission. So if you could share more information about the land trust and the progress and the potential as it stands in a month or so from now, because that is the very intention of that, is to set up a system that remains, that the property remains affordable. And the other thing
Commissioner
is,
Miller, on the land trust real quick, is we have I believe the city is going to have a workshop coming up where we are planning a deep dive. I think it might be appropriate, because I believe the county is also working on its own affordable housing piece, that we might want to try to, if we can't synchronize all the schedules, at the very least make the county commissioners aware of when that is scheduled. And I think that may lessen the burden on staff so that we can all get the same information at the same time.
Thank you. That's a great suggestion. The other thing is the salvage. The suggestion, what do other communities do? How could we incorporate some of that? You said maybe we could do something like that on a smaller scale. What can we do? Because I'm very interested in saving old stuff. And finally, I'd like, when we get into budget, I think you've heard me mention this before, but I really would like to see some sort of program that is a facade-type grant of renovation grants, renovation loans, programs like we have for commercial that are made available for residents. Because I think that a lot of folks, they just can't manage the cost of keeping the properties up, and if whatever we can do to help with that would be important. And I guess we don't have that because it's not translating into TIF, but I think generally it would, because you'd have a magnifying effect in a sense. I mean, you'd have folks bringing up the neighborhood, and that would contribute to inviting more commercial and on and on. So I really would love it if we could consider a program like that. This is just a suggestion. So especially since at our next meeting, which I guess is going to be in May, because we're getting into budgeting at that point. So I think it'll be important, if I want to get this done before I'm no longer with you, that we talk about that now, sooner rather than later. Thank you. Oh, and also, second on the Matthew Latch letter, I mean, I think he had a lot of really good suggestions, or had a really great perspective in here. And so if you could look at this closely and really take to heart what he says and see what you can, see what ideas you have as to address some of the needs he expresses.
All right, we have a motion that has been friendly amended. I just want to co-sign the comment on the affordable housing piece. When we do the land clearing, should we become landowners, that we would put a requirement on there that we replace it with affordable housing. I just think that makes great sense. And I know you guys are bringing that back, but I wanted to co-sign Commissioner Dozier's recommendation in that regard. Commissioners, there's a motion and a second on this item. All those in favor?
Mr. Mayor, I don't want to hold it up, but when you become governor, I think you should apply this as a model across the state. Thank you.
A motion and a second on the item. All those in favor, let it be known by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. Motion passes unanimously. And we're now on to item 6.01.
6.01 we can handle very quickly. This is based on previous board direction. As you know, we started demolition and construction at the Cascades project. One of the concerns that we have long had, and we've worked with the developer and the CRA board, is to make sure that all of the programs and events that happen there can still occur. We've set aside $125,000 to help fund things like renting other space if they need it, or bringing on mobile homes or some kind of tent that they might need to put on their program. Basically, the people who will be running that, the people who know the most about it, will be the people who put on the events. We've worked with Ashley Edwards from City Parks and Carrie Post from TDC. They will be basically monitoring this program and helping determine how that funding is utilized. Right now, we estimate that a program like Word of South or Southern Shakespeare, those are two that we know for sure will need that funding probably for the next 4 years. They were looking at about $10,000 per event. That would utilize $80,000 roughly it's an estimate. Of the 125, that would leave us 45,000 in flexible funding in case another event comes along. And we're looking at city and county co-sponsored events. I want to make sure that's, that wasn't as clear as it needed to be in the agenda item. But we will monitor it. If something comes up that we know we need more money for, we'll be back to the board right away and, keep things going. That's the goal. But all we need right now is your approval of this suggestion.
Mr. Mayor, I move option 1 in the interest of my personal privilege.
Second.
There's a motion, motion and a second. Commissioner Dozier.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First, I wanted to thank Ashley. You've been waiting a long time for this item to come up, I know. Thank you for being here today. And Carrie at TDC for working on this with staff. I know we had talked about this in the fall, and there were the timing issue here with the festivals happening in April and May is pretty critical. So thank you for already getting started working with those groups in conversation. And I appreciate the addition of the county-sponsored events as well. Thank you for that clarification. So the two questions I had, Roxanne, and I think you said that it was going to be working on a case-by-case basis, but the allowable uses for these fundings, this is to replace the green room space, dressing room space, storage space that events might need for actors, performers, whoever it might be, for these different events. So the money can go to accommodate those space needs, and you had mentioned either trailer or rental space. Is that correct?
I don't want to limit it to trailer or rental space because I'm not sort of an expert on that, but Ashley and Carrie are. They might have a tent or something, but whatever they need, and even if they need, for example, a little audience space like the Meridian Point building used to provide, that would be part of it. So it's going to be whatever the event needs.
Okay. Thank you for that. And I guess I missed in our discussion earlier, we had talked about the $45K being flexible funding, but if we're estimating 4 years and 2 events would use a majority of these dollars, we may have other festivals come up. These are new events, and city and county productions. I mean, obviously, a TDC concert sponsored by TDC or Leon County, performers may have their own trailers or something of that nature, and there is going to be access for them to bring those rigs in. I think we had talked about that before. But I just think it was in the interest of all of us not to slow the progress of the park. We've activated a lot. It's in the interest of North American to keep that going for their new development and for all of the developments. We are seeing the Coca-Cola bottling plant be activated for proof now, which is fantastic. So everything that's happening around the park, I just wonder if this is going to accommodate all of the other groups. These are the 2 groups we're looking at right now that we know happen at this point every spring. But this is going to be something we have to keep an eye on throughout, and I think it may be appropriate for staff to give an update on an annual basis, maybe at the start of the fiscal year or something like that, on how much has been used, what the anticipated events are for the following year, including city and county, and particularly after the first year. I don't know if we need to have that in the motion, but I see you all taking notes frantically, and I think that would be good for the CRA board.
Sure, we can do that.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. And do we anticipate that this amount is sufficient for the length of time that those rooms are going to be out of operation?
If it is not, we will know early on, and our goal is to be back to you and get additional funding well before someone needs it. So we're going to monitor that very carefully.
Commissioners, are there any questions or thoughts on this item before we head to the vote? Seeing none, all those in favor of the motion to approve, let it be known by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. Motion passes unanimously. Thank you, staff and commission. Commissioners, we're now at the point in the meeting of public comments. Are there any speakers? We've got 6 speakers in the public comment section.
At this time, we do have 6 speaker cards on agenda items. Speakers, you will have 3 minutes. Please state your name and address for the record. First, I have Mr. Doran, followed by Mr. Mann, please.
Hi, I'm Glenn Doran. I live at 1117 Azalea Drive here in Tallahassee. One of the things that's become obvious in the last 30 or 40 minutes, or what seems like maybe 4 hours, you guys have mentioned economic development, you've mentioned culture, you've mentioned arts, you've mentioned historic preservation. Mr. Lammers talked about the history of a lot of these areas. And in a way, you guys are the tip of the spear. You're going to be the ones who are pushing economic development in some of the oldest areas in Leon County and the city. And one of the things that you're going to see is almost every one of these development projects has an archaeological and historic component. And I'm not convinced that we're really taking advantage of that. If you look at Pensacola, you look at Miami, you look at St. Augustine, Charleston, I could go on for a full hour. These communities all have incorporated and consciously addressed the archaeological and historic components that are right under your literal feet. I think what we need to do is take a bigger picture and think, I think the city, county, some combination of there needs to have a city-county archaeologist. And you would be able to touch all of these things. Right now, I must confess, it's done sort of in a haphazard manner. If you drive north on North Monroe, somewhere not too far from Lake Jackson, there's a big development where there's been a land scraping, and we know there's archaeological material in there. It was recorded previously, and it's now been completely obliterated. I would bet you $1 to a hole in a donut that if I go over to Cascades Park, I'm going to see some archaeological material. I haven't violated the construction sign, but plenty of people have in the past. And the DeSoto Martin site is one of those. It was under construction. Archaeologists came in and said, yikes, I think we've got something here. I think we need to consider that in a real serious manner. And that's I didn't take my 3 minutes, but it's something that we will give you a little proposal for later.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next, Mr. Mann, please state your name and address for the record, and you have 3 minutes.
Lonnie Mann, 1120 East Windwood Way. I'm speaking for Panhandle Archaeological Society at Tallahassee. And what I'd like to encourage you to do is, for a variety of reasons, we believe that there could be archaeological deposits in the Bloxham Annex property. This property figured very importantly in the early history of Tallahassee. The early settlers, basically their first stop was that hill. There were a series of seep springs along there. That property was owned by the Surveyor General of Florida, Robert Butler, who was a protege of Andrew Jackson, and so on and so on. Our ask is simply that you ask the developer to do preliminary archaeological testing on that property. It wouldn't be enormously expensive. I mean, small 3, large 4 digits, or small 4, it would be around 10 grand, I think. It wouldn't take long, maybe a week, and we could determine if there was, in fact, archaeological deposits on the property. We're standing on a layer cake of history in Tallahassee. It's not all written down, it's under our feet. And if we destroy and terraform that property before we determine if our history is there, we've lost it forever. There's no redo. So that's, simply my little homily on the history of Tallahassee, and I like you and to work with us and encouraging the developer to do the right thing and help preserve that chapter of history. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Just, sir, I have a quick question. Sir? Mr. Mann? As you know, clearing has already begun on the site. I just have a question with regard to the timing of when something like that would need to take place. Obviously, before anything is built on it, but from a timing standpoint, would they be beyond the window for?
No, not at all. Right now, it's simply destruction of buildings. I haven't really started terraforming yet. I think it would probably get a PUD type of permit or something before they would start terraforming the property. So there is time to do it if we move on with it, and it shouldn't delay anybody in terms of what they want to do.
Got it. Commissioner Dozier.
Thank you both very much. And Lonnie, we were talking before, I was a kid visiting the Mad Dog job site at the DeSoto site, and remember when construction came to a halt there in the 80s, and we found the first encampment, the winter encampment of DeSoto. And so it was very much in this area, and it is, as you said before, you reminded me, only one of 2 DeSoto sites known in the country. Is that correct? Yes. So it is something, an excellent point to be brought up, and while I appreciate the earlier discussion about the trees, we had a tremendous amount of conversation about whether or not we could save the buildings. I will say we did not come to this point about the archaeology in the last couple of years. So this is a little different to me than some of the other public concern we have heard that we have been in dialogue about over the last couple of years, although not everybody might be happy about where we are. This is a little different. So, Roxanne, and I noted that North American folks have left. I was going to ask them a question, but where we are in the process, I assume they got a permit to clear the site so far, but do we have that window between site clearing and excavation started where we could ask City Growth Management and planning to work with North American to have time for this assessment? And I'm not sure about the funding. Certainly this wasn't in their cost. If it was joint funding, I mean, this is the only time we may be able to do that.
Yeah. I would have to defer, and I don't know if she's still here, but Karen Jumonville.
She's coming up right now, behind you. Yes.
Oh, good. Karen can answer that question for you.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Commissioners, just to clarify, as part of the permitting process, the developer was required to coordinate with the state as part of a cultural clearance letter. Part of that is looking at archaeological issues. There were a lot of historical issues that were brought up by the state, and the developer did a great job working with them to address their concerns. There were none that were archaeological related. But we're more than happy to connect the developer with the 2 gentlemen. I've already gotten the contact information so that we can get with Sean McIntyre and see if this is something that he's willing and able to do.
I think as you all have said, we don't know what's under the ground. This is the first time these buildings have come down. We've got WPA buildings there. It's been there for a long time, right? So, and certainly there was a different approach to development at that time. So thank you, Karen. And if we could stress the importance of that. And I think it's something for city and county, to go to your larger point, Glenn, that we want to look at in general, whether or not we can do this as we do more infill, particularly in the urban area and particularly around Cascades. I think that is something that we may want to talk about later. But I don't know if you need direction in order to do that, more formal direction. If so, I would make a motion to direct CRA staff, and I'm not sure I can add in their city growth management, but we'll add that to work with the developer and you all to see if we can do an assessment before excavation begins.
Is there a second? I'll second.
Thank you.
Which means you're running
Not
the
to
motion.
hold up the process, just to take this time before excavation starts, because again, they've got a site clearing permit right now. They're still working on the rest of their permits. Is that correct?
That's right. They still need to move forward with a PUD and then the environmental permit for the entire site development.
Right. So we have some time here between site clearing and that next permit, so it wouldn't necessarily hold up that next permit.
That's correct.
Okay. Thank you.
There's a motion and a second to encourage staff or give direction to staff to work with the developers in the city government around, the city county government and develop growth management around any archaeological evaluation that can be made in this process. All those in favor, let it be known by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, no.
Aye.
Motion passes. We got 5 of us, right? 4-1. All right. Thank you all. Next speaker.
Real quickly, if you had a a city archaeologist, this would all be done before the massive construction takes place. That's the ideal way to do it all across the world.
Got it. Thank you. Next speaker.
Next speakers, we have Mr. Cosmo, followed by Mr. Lammers. Please state your name and address for the record. You have 3 minutes. Thank you.
Hello, good morning, and thank you for allowing me to speak. I'm Jan DeCosmo, 2205 Jim Lee Road. I have lived here my whole life. I was born in Apalachicola, but grew up here. And I've seen through the years, all 67 of them, some of our most important historic buildings be destroyed. The Dixie Theater, the State Theater, the Florida Theater, there are more I could list. I'm here today to represent a group of about 750-something folks on a Facebook group page, Save the Firestone, the Canopy, the Cascades Canopy Oaks. It's a done deal. We realize the trees are gone, but we would like to help in this urban forestry program. We plan on participating, so maybe we can save some majestic heritage oaks in the future. I'm going to go tell my ear, nose, and throat doctor, however, that all my sinus problems can be fixed if we just cut down all the trees. Joking here. Anyway, trees can't stop a development necessarily, but maybe they could alter it. You know, there's compromise and balance, that perspective that says, you know, you have two opposing points of view. Let's find somewhere in between and compromise. Maybe we can save more heritage oaks if we continue along this pathway, which I think is a really good start, and we're going to go to these meetings and give our input to the Urban Forest Master Plan. But what I wanted to bring your attention today was something puzzling about the environmental management permit application. On February 7th, the property owner being the city, the applicant being North American Properties. It states that the 5.3 acres in the Cascades multi-use development had 121 trees to be removed, and that all of them were type 4. And the 4 types were Patriarch, Canopy, Canopy Road, Wetland, or other. So all of these trees, regardless of their age, and some were between 100 and 200 years old, were marked as other. So I'm wondering if there's some way we can get, and I hope we can in the future, a stronger tree ordinance. Why weren't some of these trees labeled as Patriarch? Because I think they were. So that's my concern, and I'm just wondering how we can call them other and chop them all down that quickly. So thank you for any comments or responses.
Thank you.
Just one point of information, and I think Karen can probably address this if necessary. There was a complete tree survey done on that site that identified the location, the size, and the type of every tree, and that was more than likely attached to the application. That might contain the information that's the most relevant.
Got it. Karen, anything to add?
Roxanne is correct. We look at, we validate all of the information that the applicant provides. So like Roxanne said, we look at the size and species of every tree and make sure that it's correctly labeled and accounted for in our debit and credit system.
Got it.
Karen, would you introduce yourself to the speaker before you leave?
Absolutely.
Great. Thank you. Next speaker.
Mr. Lammers, followed by Ms. Morgan.
Hello, I'm Jonathan Lammers. I live at 3164 Lakeshore Drive here in Tallahassee. Thank you for the opportunity to speak again. I've sort of been taken off track a little bit by the speakers before me, so I'd like to address some of their points. I know I'm a new face to you all. I moved here from San Francisco, where I worked as a historic preservation planner for the San Francisco Planning Department. Before that time, I worked at the Bureau of Archaeological Research here in town, so some of these statements go directly to my experience. First, I think congratulate you two for going forward with some archaeological testing on the area. I think Mr. Doran's suggestion of a city archaeologist is a good one. I noted when I first moved to town, the site directly across from the DeSoto Winter Encampment, which is one of the more important archaeological sites in North America, was being converted for a fast food restaurant. There's almost no archaeological testing done on that site, and almost certainly it was part of the larger site. So it does point to a real issue here in town. And that brings me to sort of a discussion of a policy issue with the CRA, and that's that we need to bring things like history and archaeology to the forefront. You may not know this, but I was the historian who wrote the brief history of the Cascades buildings for the developer. I think if that had been done early on, it would have changed the entire bid process, because the CRA would have been aware that they had National Register eligible buildings. They might have been treated, instead of a suggestion that we hope you can save them, it might be we think these are really valuable parts of our community. And they are. Those were physical manifestations of the New Deal, one of the most important government programs in this nation's history. So I think it's important that we take these things into consideration. Wrong, we look at the site's history. I agree that it would not have been, it would be a different project, created more sensitively natural and historical resources. I think that pays greater long-term benefits for the community than just scraping the site clean and starting over. Very briefly, I also want to address urban infill. I am not opposed to it. Not everything is historic, but with this program, this development, the Cascades development, so many surface parking lots directly adjacent, so many. And yet we had a site that had National Register buildings and Patriarch Oaks, and we chose that one, which was a community asset for our redevelopment, and we leave alone what I consider blighted areas in town, which are giant surface parking lots everywhere. So it's a matter of priorities and policies. It's not either or, it's thinking sensitively about the way we develop the city. So thank you very much for the time.
Thank you very much. Welcome to Tallahassee.
Thank you. Next, we have Ms. Morgan. Your name and address for the record. You have 3 minutes, and then followed by our last speaker, which will be Ms. Barr.
Rosa Morgan, 400 Capitol Circle Southeast. I would like to ask that the block-by-block program be added to the agenda for the next CRA board meeting. This was presented to the Citizens Advisory Committee last fall. It has been moved around on the agenda but never put on it, and I would like to see it on next month's agenda. It is a comprehensive proposal to do blocks of development in affordable housing in a very blighted area in Frenchtown, and I think that it would really help move forward the conversation on affordable housing. Thank you.
Thank you. Is it possible we can get that in the flow?
It is possible. There are several issues that are related to that.
We don't have to go into them now. I just want to register. It's in the, if it's affordable housing, it's in the flow of what we're all sort of debating and discussing at this time. If you are able to add it, it will be after the votes on the respective items. Commissioner Dozier, did you have a?
Wait for our last speaker.
All right. Last speaker. Ms. Barr.
Sarah Bardolph, 1520 Truly Nene. I wanted to respond to Commissioner Proctor's earlier comments regarding his distaste for trees. I was hoping that those comments were satirical, but it became clear that they were not. I know that not every tree can be saved, but certainly some are worth saving. The southern live oak, Quercus virginiana, is unique to the southeast. I encourage you to look at a map of the range of that very special tree. Several of that species were cut down at the Cascade site. These trees have inherent value, they have scientific value, they have ecological value and economic value. If Commissioner Proctor has a problem with plants that cause allergies, he should take issue with lawns as well. I'm sure that you have a beautiful lawn. Grass is responsible for a majority of seasonal allergies. My point is that your comments on trees as a public health concern are absurd. Commissioner Proctor, you stated that you believe a 150-year-old tree has lived long enough and may as well be cut down. Do you feel the same way about our historic buildings? Do you think that they have been around long enough and might as well be demolished? What is worth saving to you?
Thank you. I think we've got Commissioner Dozier in the pipeline.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I do appreciate the conversation. I think long history with the Firestone blocks, the property swap. FSU had that for a while and others, but point well taken, and I think I just want to insert this again for CRA, but also city, county. If the state moves to divest more property in the future, I think we've already teed up a conversation with our city and county leadership that we need to have a more strategic approach to how we, if and how we take in that property. The last time it happened, the universities, schools, others, we took some of that property, but we didn't have the planning in place that we have today. And so I think there may be another opportunity and lessons learned from the last time it happened, and that's why we see some of this property swap and why those two sites ended up with the CRA and the others did not. So just wanted to make that comment, but I think it is a good note for the future, for sure. And related to that, and the last thing, and again, we've said it a few times, but enjoyed CRA. We'll see what happens the next couple weeks. There have been some questions that have come up recently to me, and I've had the opportunity to talk to some staff about this, about the Sale High School property. And since I may not be back here, and this may be premature, I mentioned to Roxanne and Rick in briefing and just asked the cemetery, Leon County School property, which is the old Sale High School and Lincoln Neighborhood Center, is not in the CRA. It's kind of an island because it's public property. And so I just wanted to get it in the record. It could be a motion, Mr. Mayor, or it could just be in the record here, that should anything happen with the Sale High School property in the future, I think the school board or the Leon County Schools is looking to divest that property at some point. Should it be moved into other public ownership or private ownership that could be part of the CRA? In our conversation, I asked if that could be added to the CRA quickly as we did the assessment of the east side of South Monroe Street and that expansion. It's not as large as adding a whole new area like we did today. But I just wanted to tee that up for a future conversation, that having that property within the CRA might enable us to do other things with it, should the school board divest themselves of that property in one way or another. And I know city leadership is already in some conversations there. So with the will of the board of direction, we could have a motion if needed, but I just wanted to mention that here as potentially the last opportunity I've got. So does that resonate with you all?
Sure, if you want to make it in the form of a motion. Is there a second?
I'll second.
There's a second.
Consider that should the opportunity come up to move that property into the CRA as quickly as possible. Just want to leave that opportunity open. Thank you.
There's a motion and a second. Commissioner Proctor.
And I'd like to suggest, consistent with the motion, that I do believe that the old Lincoln High School is worth saving and not demolishing for a graveyard. And I think that question was presented, and I think that the old school is worth saving.
Commissioner Proctor, I want to clarify, no conversation about the historic Lincoln Neighborhood Center, the old Lincoln High School, about that. This is the Sale property where I went to high school next door. No, this is the Sale property, the old school that has been vacant for years, that is on.
It's an administrative.
It's
administrative now or completely vacant?
You can't use those buildings right now, most of them.
Wasn't there a sale right there by Old Lincoln?
There is. That's the current.
That's the building, yes. But no one is talking about the Lincoln Neighborhood Center itself, the old Lincoln School. No.
Okay, well, just for the record, I wanted to answer. I believe the old Lincoln School should not be demolished. That's what I believe.
I agree. Hear, hear. We have a motion and a second?
There is a motion and a second on this item. All those in favor, let me know by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. No. Motion passes 5-1. Okay, Commissioners, anything else before we adjourn?
One point of information.
Yes, sir.
The project that Mr. Rhett Turnquist has been talking about and aggravating me a lot about. Ms. Manning, is that going to be coming forward anytime before Christmas?
Yes, actually it will be. We've been working with Mr. Turnquist. There were several issues that we needed to address, some of which we did in the CRA board briefings. We anticipate bringing him back in May.
Good, because he's killing me, I'm telling you.
He's a tough character.
It's wearing me out. Okay.
Commissioner Miller?
Thank you. Well, is Jonathan Lambert still here? Thank you. I'd like to ask you to please distribute your piece on the history of Cascades Park area to all of us.
I actually wrote that 16 years ago. There's an update to it because I took one of the maps and posted on the Fairlawn.
Thank you.
I plan to put that online, but I haven't get copies to you yet.
I would love it. I have it, and I have it in my office. And it's just, it is literally the most in-depth art. Well, you did it as a graduate student, didn't you? Something like that. But anyway, he did this wonderful history of Cascades Park area, the whole area, that it's a reference for everybody. So I think if you can get that to us, we will make sure, and send it to our staff here too. The more people that can read that, see, I feel that there's that's this magical place. I mean, so many things have happened there. The DeSoto site, the settlement that was there before the DeSoto expedition came, the train, the Cascades, the meeting of the minds from the two parts of the state. There's so much history in that one area. It's amazing. I don't think there's another area of town that has that much history all bottled up in one place. So, and moving forward in how the sinkhole was treated and people drowning and on and on. So just wanted to ask you to please do that for us.
Thank you, Commissioner. And I wanted to briefly mention, to your point, that I believe the archaeology in that area is important, and you mentioned where funding would come from.
Right.
I happily donate $1,000 of my own money towards the salvage efforts, and I mean that. I want to go on the record somewhere.
Okay. Thank you.
Anything else from commissioners? We are adjourned.
Thank you. Good meeting. That's it.